Chapter 317. Seeing that the formation was broken, Cui Ming's face was filled with fear. Her voice was hoarse as she asked, "Is this what you meant by no problem? How is this possible?" Emperor Song's face was also filled with disbelief. The immortal trapping formation that he set up was even stronger than Chu Jiang of Gojoseon's 18 hellish formation. How could it be broken so easily? Even if it was unbelievable, the truth was right in front of his eyes. After Shangguanli and the other two regained their senses, they immediately flew up. Their eyes were filled with murderous intent as they looked at the three figures in front of them. Out of the 4 internal guards, 1 betrayed them, 1 was severely injured, and only 2 were left. The severely injured woman no longer had the ability to fight. Including Shangguanli, there were 3 people on both sides. There was no need for words. In an instant, the 6 of them unleashed their powers and magic treasures and quickly engaged in battle. Although Emperor Song was at the 5th realm, he was clearly a powerful cultivator at the peak of the 5th realm. Shangguanli and the other internal guard attacked with all their might. Even with the advantage of Fulu's magic treasures, they were still suppressed by him. The other inner guard was entangled by the devil sect spy and was unable to extricate himself. In this way no one could take care of Cui Ming. Cui Ming looked at Li Mu with eyes full of hatred. She said sinisterly, "It's all because of you that I am today. This day next year will be the anniversary of your death." Li Mu said calmly, "Don't accuse me. You are today only because you are a beast." Cui Ming did not waste any more words with Li Mu. She formed a seal with her fingers and the air around them cracked. A few invisible wind blades flew towards Li Mu. The wind blades were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye they were beside Li Mu. Clang. Just as they were about to hit Li Mu, a golden armor suddenly appeared around Li Mu's body. The wind blades hit the golden armor and made a crisp sound. Li Mu stood in his original position and did not move. Golden armor talisman. Cui Ming's expression was ugly. Although the golden armor talisman was only earth rank, his cultivation was only in the creation realm. With his early stage creation realm strength, it would take a lot of effort to break the golden armor talisman. Just as he was about to make a move, Li Mu moved faster than him. A white light flashed in his hand and a stack of Fulu appeared in his hand. Without thinking he threw them all out. Rumble. Above Cui Ming's head, dark clouds gathered and purple thunderbolts flashed continuously. Cui Ming dodged a few purple heavenly thunderbolts in a sorry state. Suddenly he felt a chill on his back and his hair stood on end. A golden sword talisman was thrusting towards his back. Clang. Cui Ming held a bronze mirror in his hand to protect his vitals. When the sword talisman hit the bronze mirror, it immediately shattered. Cui Ming's body was also sent flying several feet. Before he could come back to his senses, he suddenly felt a chill rising from below, as if it was going to freeze his primordial spirit. When he bent down to take a look, he realized that his feet had already been frozen, and the layer of ice was still spreading upwards. Under the layer of ice, there was a Fulu that emitted a bone-chilling coldness. Cui Ming slapped his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. When the blood landed on the layer of ice quickly melted. Cui Ming flew up and broke free from the layer of ice. In the next moment he felt a burning sensation above his head. Cui Ming looked up and saw a Fulu burning and turning into a fire dragon. The fire dragon swung its tail and coiled around him. Before the first wave subsided, another wave rose. Cui Ming was chased by the fire dragon, and he was still extremely depressed. Exactly how many high-grade talismans does this Li Mu possess? He's a 5th level expert, yet he was actually forced to only be on the defensive by Li Mu, who's a level lower than him, and he didn't have the slightest ability to retaliate. After using his mystique with great difficulty to kill the fire dragon, another small golden sword pierced towards him from the front. Cui Ming swung his sword at the sword talisman with all his might. He did not notice that a small paper man had already flown behind him. The paper man stuck to Cui Ming's body. Cui Ming maintained his sword-swinging posture and was rooted to the spot. Whoosh. The small golden sword was extremely fast and was aimed at his forehead. At this moment, Cui Ming was unable to use his dermic powers. If he was pierced by the sword talisman, his primordial spirit might be able to escape, but his physical body would definitely perish. Bang. Seeing that Cui Ming was in trouble, Emperor Song abandoned Shangguanli and the expert inner guard and rushed over. He kicked Cui Ming away and used one hand to grab the sword talisman. Black fog spread out from his hand, and the sword talisman struggled and buzzed a few times before dimming and completely collapsing. Emperor Song waved his hand, and the immobilization talisman on Cui Ming's body burned. He looked at Cui Ming and said, You were actually forced into this state by a 4th level junior. Could it be that you only know how to enjoy yourself these years in the Immortals' capital and neglected your cultivation? Chui Ming's face darkened. He said, "This person has countless treasures on him. You can try and see how difficult it is to deal with him." "Then I'll deal with him first," Emperor Song said lightly. His hands moved quickly and formed a huge ghost seal in the air. This ghost seal was 10 feet square. After it was formed, it smashed towards Li Mu's head with the speed of lightning. Li Mu still stood where he was. As the ghost seal descended, the golden armor on his body shattered. Just as the ghost seal was about to land on his body, Li Mu's body emitted a white light again. When the white light touched the ghost seal stopped in mid-air, unable to land and finally collapsed. Emperor Song's eyes were filled with shock. He blurted out, "An upper-grade heaven-class protective Dharma treasure." At this moment he was cursing in his heart. Just how much did the Empress of the Great Zhou pamper Li Mu? An upper-grade heaven-class protective Dharma treasure was even more precious than Fulu and elixirs of the same level. It was also a rare item even for a 6th-level cultivator. Yet, it was worn by a 4th-level cultivator. Even a 6th-level cultivator would need to attack with all his might to break through the defense of this Dharma treasure. Normal attacks below the 6th level were no different from scratching an itch to him. Shangguanli saw that Emperor Song also had his eyes on Li Mu and was about to come over with the internal guard. Li Mu waved his hand at them and said, "You guys go deal with that spy first. Leave Chui Ming and this ghost to me." Shangguanli saw the white light on Li Mu's body and knew that the Empress must have given him an even more powerful Dharma treasure. Emperor Song and Chui Ming couldn't do anything to him for a while, so she wasn't worried anymore. She said to the middle-aged woman beside her, "Clean up the sect first, then help him." Emperor Song also looked at Li Mu and said to Chui Ming in a low voice, "You and I work together to deal with this person. This Dharma treasure requires mana to activate, and he's only a 4th-level cultivator. Let's see how long he can last." An upper-grade heaven-class Dharma treasure drained a lot of mana. This was because it was originally designed for 6th-level cultivators. Dongshen cultivators could use it continuously for 2 hours, but a divine-tier cultivator might not even be able to last for half an hour. In a situation where the outside world was constantly attacking, the duration would be even shorter. Li Mu's mind moved and a pile of spiritual jades appeared at his feet. As he absorbed the spiritual energy in the spiritual jades, he used the swordsman formula to recover his mana using the power of heaven and earth around him. Only then did he manage to achieve a dynamic balance with the speed at which the Dharma treasure was draining his mana. Emperor Song and Chui Ming attacked Li Mu from afar, and their faces gradually showed signs of doubt. They originally thought that Li Mu would last for a while at most, but now that half an hour had passed, he still seemed to be in good spirits and did not look like he had overdrawn his mana at all. On the other hand, the two of them were the ones who were draining their mana continuously. If this continued, they might be the first to run out of mana. Emperor Song attacked a few more times and finally gave up. He said, "This person is strange. Spells and divine powers are useless against him. Let's get close and take his life." He stretched out his hands and 2 ghostly long blades appeared in his hands. Chui Ming took out a folding fan from his waist. The two of them stopped attacking Li Mu from afar and flew towards him. In a situation where the difference in mana was not too great, Li Mu was not afraid of anyone in close-range combat. However, regardless of whether it was Chui Ming or Emperor Song, their mana was far superior to his. In the face of absolute power, any technique was meaningless. If the examiners of the Ministry of War did not suppress their abilities to the 4th level, no matter how skilled Li Mu was in martial arts, he would not be a match for them in the combat examination. Emperor Song and Chui Ming, these two shameless people, one in the Destiny realm and the other in the peak of the Spectral Spirit realm, teamed up to bully him who was at the 4th level. No matter how powerful Li Mu's divine powers and Dao techniques were, his cultivation was too low, and he would not be able to defeat the two of them together. Fortunately, ever since Lu Hanyin became Yu Zhenzi's disciple, ever since he hugged the Empress' thigh, divine powers and Dao techniques were no longer his trump cards. Li Mu flipped his hand and 2 Fulu cards appeared in his hand. He threw the Fulu out and a golden light flashed on the Fulu. The 2 Fulu cards turned into 2 armored soldiers about 10 feet tall. The 2 armored soldiers held long halberds, and their bodies emitted 5th-level aura. These 2 golden armor soldier talismans were bestowed to him by the Empress. Although they were also at the heavenly level, they could not be compared to the one Li Mu obtained from Fulu School. Only a handful of talisman Dao experts in Fulu School could create 6th-level golden armor soldier talismans. However, Cui Ming and Emperor Song were only at the 5th level, and there was no need to use that trump card. The 2 golden armor soldier talismans were controlled by Li Mu, and they were telepathically connected to Li Mu. After they appeared, they went straight for Cui Ming and Emperor Song. What talisman is this? How many Fulu cards does he have? The 2 golden armor soldier talismans completely entangled Cui Ming and Emperor Song. Cui Ming was weaker and was quickly suppressed by the golden armor soldier. Emperor Song dealt with 1 golden armor soldier with ease. Li Mu simply let the 2 golden armor soldiers work together to deal with Emperor Song, and he threw out another stack of Fulu cards at Cui Ming. Cui Ming held a fan-shaped weapon in his hand and dealt with it in a pathetic manner. He had cultivated for many years, and he had never been so frustrated in a battle. This was not a battle at all, but a competition to see who was richer. He glared at Li Mu and said coldly, "Do you think you are the only one with Fulu?" He took out a Fulu card from his chest. His face showed a pained expression, but he still activated it without hesitation. The power of heaven and earth above Li Mu's head rippled, and a huge golden palm print appeared from the void and pressed down on him. This Fulu card was obviously not an ordinary item. The power of heaven and earth contained in this palm print was comparable to a normal attack from a 6th realm cultivator. Li Mu's armor artifact could withstand a 6th realm cultivator's attack, but it was not unlimited. In fact, the armor artifact could help him weaken the attack, but he still had to bear a portion of it himself. The armor artifact would also be damaged after taking several hits from a Dongxin cultivator. Even with the armor artifact, Li Mu could not avoid being injured after taking this hit. He did not even think and threw out a few more Fulu cards. Light and shadow overlapped above Li Mu's head. A golden armor, a green shield, a tortoise shell, and a bell shadow protected him firmly. When the palm print pressed down, the golden armor was the first to crumble. The green shield lasted for a moment before crumbling as well. The tortoise shell and bell shadow were the last to crumble. After breaking through 4 barriers, the palm print was like an arrow at the end of its flight. It was easily neutralized by Li Mu's armor artifact. A few more Fulu cards appeared in Li Mu's hand. He looked at Cui Ming and said, "Do you have more?" Cui Ming's face was gloomy. He was not Li Mu. He did not have the Empress's favor, so he naturally did not have so many high-level Fulu cards. He no longer had any Fulu cards of that level. Even if he did, it would probably be wasted. Although he did not want to admit it, he had to admit that he could not do anything to Li Mu by himself. He could only hope that Emperor Song could destroy the 2 divine weapons or exhaust their spiritual energy so that they would dissipate on their own. Although the divine weapons were powerful, they would not exist for long. Cui Ming's mind wandered for a moment before he suddenly felt something tighten around his waist. He looked down and realized that a golden rope had wrapped around his waist. After being bound by the rope, Cui Ming's spiritual energy was immediately sealed. His body fell heavily from the sky. Li Mu walked slowly towards Cui Ming and kicked him heavily. He asked, "You still have time to be distracted when you are fighting others. Who are you looking down on?" Chapter 318. Before Lu Hanyin became Yu Zhenzi's disciple, and before Li Mu clung to the Empress' thigh, he was very frugal with his fights of magical power. Not to mention that there was no Fulu at that time. Even if there was, Li Mu would not bear to use it. At that time he was carrying out missions and getting injured was a common thing. Occasionally he would even be seriously injured. But ever since Lu Hanyin entered Fulu school and Li Mu became the Empress' close vassal, the situation completely changed. Fulu school naturally did not lack Fulu. Li Mu could not even imagine how rich the Empress' treasury was. Now he had the capital to be extravagant. If he was poor he would use his tactics, and if he was rich he would use his firepower to cover. In any case, if he ran out of Fulu, Lu Hanyin would give it to him. If his transcendent artifact was broken, the Empress would replace it for him. Li Mu was the woman behind Lu Hanyin, and the Empress was the woman behind him. With his own woman there was no need to be polite. Cui Ming was tightly bound by the immortal binding chains, and his transcendence energy was restricted. When he heard Li Mu's words, he almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Fight of magical power? That damned Li Mu, he called throwing Fulu and launching a transcendent artifact sneak attack a fight of magical power? From beginning to end, had he ever used any magical power? On the other side, Emperor Song was entangled by 2 golden-armored soldiers. Although these 2 soldiers did not pose too much of a threat to him, they kept him firmly pinned down, preventing him from helping Cui Ming. Seeing Cui Ming captured so quickly, Emperor Song secretly cursed Cui Ming's incompetence. He was actually captured alive by a cultivator one level lower than him, but he could not watch him die without doing anything. With a low roar, his body turned into a cloud of ghost fog, enveloping the two golden-armored soldiers. Golden light shone brightly in the black fog, and soon, Li Mu lost contact with the two golden-armored soldiers. The black fog reformed into Emperor Song again, but his aura was now much weaker than before. It was not easy for him to defeat the two soldiers. After dealing with the two soldiers, Emperor Song rushed straight towards Li Mu. Li Mu casually threw out two Fulu, which turned into two golden-armored soldiers, blocking Emperor Song's figure. Emperor Song was already a little stunned. Such a precious Fulu, ordinary cultivators would carefully keep it as a life-saving trump card at a critical moment. However, such a precious Fulu was like an ordinary yellow paper in Li Mu's hands. He threw it away as he pleased. Even as an enemy, Emperor Song felt his heart ache when he saw this. Emperor Song was blocked by two more soldiers. Li Mu looked at Cui Ming on the ground, wondering if he should hand him over to the imperial court or kill him on the spot. Meizong had spent 20 years to help Cui Ming to the position of assistant minister of the secretariat. His position in Meizong must not be low, and he must know many secrets of the demon sect. It would be a waste to kill him just like that. Cui Ming's body was tied up and he could not move. When he raised his head, he saw the murderous intent on Li Mu's face. A trace of ruthlessness appeared on his face. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of essence blood. His lips moved slightly and no one knew what he was saying. The next moment, a white light flashed on his body, and his figure suddenly disappeared. The immortal binding lock fell to the ground, and Cui Ming's body reappeared 10 feet away. His face was as pale as paper and his breath was extremely weak. At this moment, a scream came from Shangguan Li's direction. Under the siege of Shangguan Li and another expert internal guard, that demon sect spy's body was quickly destroyed. His primordial spirit was also captured and trapped in a magic treasure. Shangguan Li and the middle-aged woman flew over and said, "Kill Cui Ming and leave his primordial spirit behind." The two controlled their flying swords and attacked Cui Ming, while Li Mu stood aside and watched. Cui Ming had just escaped from the immortal binding lock with some kind of secret technique. He was already seriously injured and was no match for the two of them. Cui Ming looked at the two and roared, "You forced me to do this." He suddenly opened the folding fan in his hand, took out 7 ribs, and quickly stabbed them into 7 parts of his body. Then he took out a piece of Fulu and swallowed it. Whoosh, whoosh. All of this happened very quickly. After Cui Ming did all this, Shangguan Li and the expert internal guard's flying swords were already in front of him. One sword was aimed at his chest, the other at his throat. When the two flying swords were only an inch away from Cui Ming's body, they both stopped. Cui Ming stretched out his hands and grabbed the two flying swords. The two flying swords struggled in his hands. Cui Ming clenched his fists and the two flying swords directly shattered. Poof! Shangguan Li and the middle-aged woman were mentally connected to their magic treasures. When their magic treasures were destroyed, the two of them spat out a mouthful of blood. They stared at Cui Ming in shock. To be able to crush their magic treasures with his bare hands, what cultivation level was Cui Ming at now? Cui Ming threw the shattered flying swords on the ground and looked at them indifferently. His aura quickly climbed from early-stage creation realm to mid-stage creation realm, and then to peak creation realm. It did not stop until he broke through a certain barrier. A powerful pressure suddenly descended. Li Mu had felt this pressure from cultivators at the 6th level before. Emperor Song noticed the change in Cui Ming. After being stunned for a moment, he forced the two golden-armored soldiers back and said respectfully, "Emperor Song, one of the 10 kings of hell under the Nether Hell Saint, greets the Heavenly Lord." Cui Ming glanced at him. There was only indifference and disdain in his eyes. It was obvious that he did not take him seriously. Li Mu noticed that Emperor Song had addressed Cui Ming as Heavenly Lord. He carefully observed this person. As expected, although he still had Cui Ming's aura on him, his temperament and strength were poles apart from Cui Ming's. Cui Ming had obviously used the divine power of self-sacrifice to make a powerful cultivator of the demon sect descend from a distance. This powerful cultivator was at least at the 7th level. Only a 7th level cultivator could raise Cui Ming's strength so much from a distance. Li Mu had inherited the memories of the Thousand Illusions venerable master, so he was not unfamiliar with the powerful cultivators of the demon sect. There was only one 7th level cultivator of the demon sect who had the title of Heavenly Lord. That was the great elder of the demon sect's Mirage sect, the Heavenly Lord of Myriad Illusions, who held a prominent position in the demon sect's 10 sects. This person's cultivation was at the 7th level, and his strength far surpassed that of the Thousand Illusions' venerable master. Of course, his actual body was very far away from here. This was only his avatar. Li Mu ordered the 2 golden-armored soldiers to give up on Emperor Song and go straight for Cui Ming. He wanted to test his strength first. Cui Ming, who was possessed by the Heavenly Lord of Myriad Illusions avatar, glanced indifferently at the 2 golden-armored soldiers. He reached out his right hand and clenched it lightly. The 2 golden-armored soldiers' bodies were restrained. They immediately collapsed and turned into specks of golden light. This was the difference between the 6th level and the 5th level. This difference was almost impossible to make up for. Shangguan Li's expression had already become very serious. After Cui Ming's aura soared to the 6th level, she knew that even though they had broken the array, they would not be able to escape today. She stuffed the fulu into Li Mu's hand and said, "We'll hold him back for a while. You take the opportunity to escape. Yunzhong County is no longer safe. Go to Baiyun Mountain as fast as you can." Li Mu asked, "Can you stop him?" Shangguan Li said in a low voice, "It's enough for you to activate this talisman and escape." Li Mu said helplessly, "Can you stop thinking about dying all the time?" Shangguan Li looked at Cui Ming and said, "His current strength has already reached the 6th level. If it weren't for that demon sect spy, we would still have hope. But now, if you don't leave, we can only die together." Li Mu said, "I still have a high-grade heaven tier fulu. It can summon a 6th level gold-armored soldier." Shangguan Li was stunned for a moment and immediately said, "Then hurry up and take it out." Li Mu hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't bear to." This fulu was his final trump card. It was too wasteful to use it on Cui Ming. Li Mu did not believe that the 10,000 Illusions god was really so powerful. Just a divine clone from a distance was enough to let Cui Ming cross a major realm. Even if he did look like a 6th level, he was definitely not as strong as a true 6th level. Shangguan Li looked at Li Mu. Her lips moved, but she suddenly did not know what to say. At this moment of life and death, he could not bear to part with a fulu? She really wanted to burrow into Li Mu's heart and see what he was thinking. Li Mu walked in front of Shangguan Li and said, "You two rest for a while first. I'll test him." Shangguan Li was at a loss. Cui Ming was already at the 6th level. No matter how powerful Li Mu's Dharma treasure was, it was still at the 4th level. The difference of 2 major realms could not be bridged. However, in the next moment, she realized that Li Mu's aura was also continuing to rise. Early stage divine power, mid-stage divine power, peak stage divine power, early stage creation realm, mid-stage creation realm. His aura finally stabilized at the mid-stage creation realm. It was even stronger than Shangguan Li's. Shangguan Li looked at Li Mu in a daze. At this moment, there seemed to be an illusion overlapping on his body. It was the illusion of a woman. Li Mu formed a seal with his hands and chanted in his heart, "Heaven and earth are limitless. Borrow the power of the universe. The power is born from the heart and grows endlessly. Heavenly Lord Tai, as the law commands." The Qingxian sword turned into thousands of sword shadows and slashed toward Cui Ming. Cui Ming raised his hands and a golden light shield appeared around his body. The sword shadows fell on the light shield and shattered. When the last sword light fell, the light shield was also full of cracks and shattered. Li Mu's hand seals changed again and he chanted, "Heaven and earth are limitless. Receive the order of the wind and thunder. The dragon fights in the wild, destroy all. Heavenly Lord Tai, as the law commands." When the last word command fell, wind and thunder suddenly erupted around Cui Ming. Green squall and purple lightning wrapped around Cui Ming's body. Emperor Song retreated. The lightning made one's scalp tingle. The green squall seemed to be able to suppress the soul and primordial spirit. Just by getting closer, his primordial spirit felt like it was going to be blown away. He looked at Li Mu with a terrified gaze. It was no wonder that Cui Ming would fall into this person's hands. He looked like he was only at the 4th realm, but whether it was his Fulu Dharma treasure or his Abhijna Dao technique, they were all incredible. Even if a strong person at the peak of the 5th realm encountered him, they would not be at an advantage. After a while, the wind and thunder dissipated. Cui Ming's clothes were tattered and his hair was disheveled. His body was charred and his aura was much weaker than before. He looked at Li Mu with a murderous gaze and said eerily, "You've had enough fun. It's my turn now, right?" In the blink of an eye, he pointed a finger at Li Mu. Li Mu's expression flickered as he said, "That's right." In the void, the power of heaven and earth vibrated violently. A huge finger quickly formed and pointed at Li Mu and Shangguan Li. The finger landed heavily, bringing with it a strong pressure. Li Mu and Shangguan Li were locked in place by this finger and could not escape. Li Mu changed his hand seals again and silently recited the third sentence of the Demon Slayer protective incantation. Fu Hua Heavenly King, descend upon the one of heaven, heaven, earth, black, yellow, yin-yang mystical art. Heavenly Lord Tai, command urgently. The yin-yang twin fish appeared above his head and formed a huge Taiji diagram. When the finger landed on the Taiji diagram, it did not cause any ripples and was directly swallowed by the Taiji diagram. Heavenly Net, Earth Yamaraja, unsheathed sword of wisdom, slay demons and spirits. Heavenly Lord Tai, command urgently. Li Mu changed his hand seals for the last time. The thick power of heaven and earth condensed into an illusory sword in front of him. After this sword appeared, it instantly disappeared and pierced through Cui Ming's chest at an incomprehensible speed. Emperor Song's face was extremely pale. That illusory sword made him feel extreme fear from the bottom of his heart. He was sure that if this sword pierced through his body, only the 8 kings of hell would be left under the Nether Hell Saint. After being pierced by the illusory sword, Cui Ming's body did not change much. However, his aura dropped from the early stage of the 6th realm to the 5th realm. At the same time, the aura on his body also disappeared. Li Mu could no longer feel the aura of the Lord of Illusions. He clapped his hands and looked at Cui Ming, who was struggling to get up. That's it? Chapter 319. After the avatar of the Lord of Illusions was killed, Cui Ming's primordial spirit took over the body again. He crawled up from the ground with difficulty, blood still gushing out from the bloody holes on his body. At this moment, his clothes were ragged and his hair was disheveled. Wrinkles appeared on his originally handsome face, and he looked more than 10 years older. He sacrificed his lifespan in exchange for the avatar of the Lord of Illusions to descend. The price was that his lifespan was reduced by at least 10 years, and his cultivation level dropped to the 4th realm. But even so, he was still defeated. In terms of Fulu and magic treasures, he was not as good as Li Mu. In terms of magical powers, he was still inferior. Li Mu had just used a powerful Dao technique that even the avatar of the Lord of Illusions could not escape. Shangguan Li and the 2 internal guards were already prepared to die, but they also watched as Li Mu used a series of moves to beat Cui Ming back to his original state. In a short 15 minutes they went from despair to hope, and then to despair again. In the extreme darkness they welcomed the final light. After a short silence, a black-robed figure burst into a cloud of black fog and quickly fled. Want to run? Li Mu looked in the direction that Emperor Song disappeared, and in the next moment his figure also disappeared. Not long after, in the distant mountains, there were bursts of powerful magical power fluctuations. After 15 minutes, Li Mu's figure floated back to the original place. Shangguan Li and the internal guard had already tied up Cui Ming. Shangguan Li walked over and looked at Li Mu with a complicated gaze and asked, "Where is Emperor Song?" Li Mu stretched out his hand, and a cloud of pure soul power floated in his palm. Suhi could have completely awakened a few days ago, but she had been stabilizing her cultivation level in the ice coffin. Suhi used half a year to refine Thousand Illusions' honored master's soul energy. Then she absorbed the soul energy of those ghosts. Under the effects of the origin pill, when she awoke from the ice coffin, she actually advanced to the middle stage of the ghost soul realm. At that moment she possessed Li Mu, which meant that Li Mu had the strength of a mid-stage blessed realm cultivator. This allowed him to perform the complete 4th level of the demon slaying protection art, as well as the first 6 words of the 9 syllables. Even if he did not use his Fulu or magical equipment, he would still be able to fight against an opponent in the early stage of the 6th stage. Using Cui Ming's body, the Heavenly Lord of Illusions avatar could not unleash the true strength of a 6th realm cultivator. It was not difficult to kill him. As for Emperor Song, he was only a late-stage spectral soul, so it would be even easier to deal with him. Shangguan Li looked at the soul power of Emperor Song in Li Mu's hand, and her expression became even more complicated. She did not expect that there would be a spy from the demon sect among her subordinates, nor did she expect that Cui Ming would have such a powerful trump card. If Li Mu had not arrived in time, they would have been completely wiped out this time. Suhi walked out of Li Mu's body, and Li Mu gave her the soul power of Emperor Song. Then he looked at Cui Ming and said, "Cui Ming is right here. Sister Su can do whatever you want with him." Shangguan Li finally understood that the reason why Li Mu could kill the Heavenly Lord of Illusions avatar was because of this female ghost in front of her. She hesitated and thought for a moment before saying, "Cui Ming is a spy from the demon sect, so he must know a lot of secrets of the demon sect. Can we bring him back to the divine capital first and search his soul before you can do whatever you want with him? Cui Ming had also seen Su He. He knelt on the ground and begged, Su He, I was wrong in the past. Seeing that we were once engaged, please spare me. Su He looked at Cui Ming. Her gaze was calm and there were no ripples. She was not as hysterical as Madame Chu when she saw Cui Ming. There was not even hatred in her eyes. She only looked at Cui Ming for a moment before looking away. She said calmly, you can do whatever you want with him. Cui Ming's crying was too noisy. Shangguanli decided to seal his primordial spirit. Li Mu's ears were finally much quieter. He took out the spiritual snail and injected his mana into it. He transmitted his voice, Your Majesty, I have already met up with Commander Shangguan. Cui Ming has also been captured. Your Majesty need not worry. Soon, a voice came from the spiritual snail, You and Ali are not injured, right? Li Mu replied, Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. Commander Shangguan was slightly injured, but it's not a big deal. Li Mu saw that Shangguanli was looking at the spiritual snail. He passed it to her and said, You can talk to Her Majesty. Shangguanli took the spiritual snail and walked to the side. Li Mu looked at Su He and asked, Don't you want to take revenge with your own hands? When Li Mu first met Su He, her hatred for Cui Ming was no less than Madame Chu's. But now she could no longer feel any hatred from Su He. Su He said calmly, He's going to die anyway. Why should I dirty my hands? Li Mu looked at her and seemed to understand something. She did not let Cui Ming go. She let herself go. Like Madame Chu, she had a deep hatred for Cui Ming. But in Madame Chu's eyes, there was only hatred. If women were compared to water, Madame Chu would be a pool of stagnant water. Su He would be a cheerful mountain spring, always full of life and vitality. Compared to a pool of stagnant water, Li Mu still preferred a lively mountain spring. He was very gratified that Su He could walk out of her hatred. Her memory was still stuck at the battle with the Treant and the encirclement of a group of ghosts. Li Mu had already told her what happened after, but she still had some questions. She looked at Li Mu and asked, What about her? Li Mu knew who she was asking about. He said, After you fell asleep, I let her go. If she hadn't stopped those ghosts for a moment, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to see you again. Su He's gaze was somewhat complicated. She had once thought that the female corpse who had given birth to her own consciousness under the water would be her mortal enemy. But after she broke out of the formation, she only felt a closeness from her bloodline, because they were originally one. At this time, Shangguanli walked over and handed the spiritual conch to Li Mu, saying, Thank you. Li Mu accepted the spiritual conch and waved his hand, saying, No need to be so polite. We're all on the same side. Besides, Cui Ming and I also have a great hatred. Even without you, I would have killed him. Su He looked at Li Mu and asked, What hatred do you have against Cui Ming? Li Mu was stunned for a moment. Then he said unhappily, You heartless person. What hatred do I have against Cui Ming? Didn't I do it for you? Su He rolled her eyes at him and said, I'm a ghost. I don't have a heart to begin with. Li Mu had never taken advantage of Su He verbally, so he stopped bickering with her. He just reminded Shangguanli, there should be spies from the Meizong sect among the internal guards. You have to remind His Majesty that Cui Ming's capture should not be made public for the time being, so as not to alert the enemy. Since the incarnation of Lord of Illusions was killed, he must have already known that Cui Ming was captured. Perhaps he will remind the spies from the Meizong sect. From now on, we must keep an eye on all suspicious figures in the internal guards and the imperial court. Shangguanli nodded and said, I know. Li Mu asked again, How will you return to Luoyang? Emperor Song was dead and Cui Ming was also captured. The demon sect would not let it go. They might ambush them on the way. Shangguanli said, His Majesty will send someone to escort us. Then she realized something and asked, You're not going back with us? Li Mu shook his head and said, I'm here on vacation. I just came to see if there were any accidents here. Now that the matter has been resolved, there's nothing else for me to do. You can go back to North County or Yunzhong County first and wait for His Majesty to send someone to escort you. Li Mu was Shangguanli's subordinate in name. However, Shangguanli did not say anything about his orders. He had already used his strength to prove that only by listening to him could they overcome all kinds of dangers. Shangguanli and the 3 internal guards, 1 was seriously injured and 2 were lightly injured. Li Mu first escorted them back to North County and settled them in the county government. Then he and Su He went to a village outside Yangqiu County. Su He stood in front of a collapsed house at the entrance of the village and did not move for a long time. An old man walked out of a wooden door next door. He looked at Li Mu in confusion and asked, "Young man, where are you from? What are you doing here?" Li Mu pointed at the collapsed house and asked, "Old man, where are the people who used to live here?" "Dead, they're all dead." The old man shook his head and said, "Ever since Xiao He went missing, her parents also left in less than 2 years. It's been almost 20 years. I don't know if Xiao He is still alive." Li Mu glanced at Su He beside him and asked, "Old man, where are they buried?" The old man did not answer directly this time. Instead, he looked at Li Mu and asked, "Young man, who are you? Why are you asking about this?" Li Mu said, "I'm a relative of this family." The old man looked at Li Mu and Su He in confusion. Then he pointed to a place not far away and said, "It's over there. The old man buried them personally." Seeing Li Mu and Su He walk over, he scratched his head that did not have many strands of hair and said in surprise, "This girl looks familiar. Where have I seen her before?" Su family village, in the field at the entrance of the village. Su He knelt in front of a lone grave and did not say a word. Li Mu did not say anything either. He silently removed the weeds on the grave. Su He's death was an accident. Before she died, she had a deep resentment so she could become a Yin spirit. However, her parents had died a normal death. Their souls had truly dissipated. After removing the weeds on the grave, he did not disturb Su He. He returned to the entrance of the village and knocked on the wooden door. The old man came out again and asked, "Young man, is there anything else?" Li Mu took out a few banknotes and handed them to the old man. He said, "I'm a relative of this family. Thank you for burying them. Please accept this money as our gratitude." The old man took the banknotes in a daze. When he came back to his senses, the young man in front of him had already walked away. He looked down at the banknotes in his hand and still found it hard to believe. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Only then did he realize that these were really banknotes. Each banknote was worth 100 taels of silver. He had never seen so much money in his life. When he thought of the girl's appearance again, he suddenly thought of something. He shivered and hurriedly ran into the house. As he ran, he said, "Wife, come out quickly. I seem to have met a ghost just now. Come and see if I'm holding a banknote in my hand." Walking out of the Su family village, Li Mu saw that Su He's mood had obviously improved. He asked, "What are you going to do next?" Su He shook her head and said, "I haven't thought about it yet." Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "Why don't you go to Luoyang with me? If we work together, we won't be afraid of Dongxian. I have a big house in Luoyang. You can choose a yard." Su He rolled her eyes and said, "I'm a woman. I'm so young and unmarried. What am I to you if I follow you without any status?" Li Mu thought of what she had just said and said, "You just said that you're a ghost, not a human. Besides, how are you young?" The surrounding temperature suddenly dropped. Li Mu's face suddenly revealed a bright smile. He said, "How is Sister Su young?" Young is used to describe women after the age of 18. In my heart, you will always be 18. Chapter 320. For women, age was a taboo after the age of 18. Su He actually did not have this problem. She was 18 when she died. From then on, her life would forever be fixed at 18 years old. From a certain point of view, even after 1,000 years or even 10,000 years, she would still be 18. In Yangqiu County, in the old mansion in the county, Li Mu and Su He ate the hot pot that she had been longing for a long time. Su He did not directly promise him that she would go to Luoyang with him in 3 months, but she did not reject him either. She felt guilty for her late parents and wanted to stay here to watch over their graves for a month. For the past 20 years, Su He had been trapped in the Gulf of Clearwater. What she had experienced the most, besides hatred, was loneliness. In the past, she had often blamed Li Mu for not accompanying her. Li Mu had simply released 2 female ghosts, one big and one small, to accompany her. Su He was obviously bored out of her wits. Li Mu ate hot pot with her 3 times in 2 days. On the 3rd day, Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li arrived at Yangqiu County. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of War came with them. He was under the Empress' orders to escort Shangguan Li and the others back to the divine capital. Most of the 6th realm cultivators in the imperial court were senior officials. The Empress' inner guard had only been established for a short period of time, so there weren't any cultivators above the 6th realm. However, the imperial court had the consecration department, which had many independent cultivators recruited by the imperial court. But this operation was top secret. For safety reasons, the Empress still sent the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War. The Ministry of War and White Deer Institute had always been neutral. They didn't involve themselves in the imperial court. The generals guarded the borders of the Great Zhou. Even if there was a change of regime in the Great Zhou, they wouldn't withdraw their troops. The officials of the Ministry of War were loyal to the current ruler. This time when they went to Yingzhou to investigate, they passed by Yunzhong County and met Madame Chu, who was looking for Shangguanli and the others. This was the first time that Su He and Mrs. Chu had met. Li Mu was a little worried that they would have a conflict, so he secretly looked in their direction a few times. Seeing that they didn't seem to have any intention of fighting, he gradually relaxed. In the corner of the courtyard, Mrs. Chu looked at Su He and said apologetically, "Miss Su, I'm sorry. At that time I only knew that you went missing. I didn't know that you were killed by that beast Chui Ming." Su He shook her head slightly and said, "You were also harmed by Chui Ming. You don't have to apologize to me." Madame Chu heaved a sigh of relief and said, "I still have to thank you. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid that my soul would have dissipated long ago, and I wouldn't have had the chance to personally take revenge." Su He was a little surprised and asked, "Why do you say that?" Madame Chu said, "Back in the northern county, in order to take revenge, I became a ghost general under Chu Jiang of Gozhouzian. Later on I almost made a big mistake. Originally I was going to die at the hands of Lord Chui Ming, but Lord Li learned of my old grudge with Chui Ming and spared my life. He brought me to Luoyang to find an opportunity to identify Chui Ming and take revenge on you." Su He glanced at Li Mu, who was not far away. Li Mu didn't tell her about these things. She only knew that Chui Ming was a spy from the demon sect and was being hunted down by the Great Zhou court. She didn't know that there were so many twists and turns before this matter. As for Chui Ming, she didn't tell Li Mu in detail. She only mentioned it twice. When Li Mu woke her up from her deep sleep, Chui Ming was already in front of her, waiting for her to personally take revenge. Obviously, although Li Mu didn't ask her, he kept this matter in mind. She looked at Madame Chu and asked, "What exactly happened in between?" Li Mu didn't look in the direction of Su He and Madame Chu anymore. This was because Mr. May's stare made her feel a little uneasy. Mr. May looked him up and down. In the end he couldn't help but ask, "How did you do it?" Li Mu played dumb and said, "Do what?" Mr. May said, "Don't play dumb with me. You're just a level 4 cultivator. How did you defeat Chui Ming, who was possessed by a level 6 cultivator?" Li Mu looked in the direction of Su He and said, "This is all thanks to Sister Su. If she didn't possess my body, the avatar of the Lord of Illusions could crush me with one finger." Mr. May glanced at him and said, "Don't give me that. She's just a level 5 cultivator. Do you think it's so easy to make up for the difference of a level?" Li Mu thought for a while and said, "Actually, after Chui Ming was possessed, his aura was just a little stronger. In reality he wasn't that strong. With Sister Su's mana and the Dao techniques that my master taught me, it's not strange that I defeated him." Mr. May looked at him. It was still uncertain whether Li Mu's old man master really existed. This reason wasn't very convincing. But she couldn't ask any more. At this time the assistant minister of the Ministry of War said, "Where is Chui Ming? If we delay there might be changes. To prevent the demon sect from leaking information, I'll search his soul first. Then I'll immediately send a message to Luoyang to find the spy in the court." While Shangguanli and the others were recuperating in the county office, Chui Ming, whose primordial spirit was sealed, was temporarily kept in the flask heaven space by Li Mu to avoid any accidents. As long as he was with Su He, after the two of them combined, even if the demon sect sent someone of the elder level, they wouldn't be able to bring Chui Ming back. Li Mu waved his hand and Chui Ming rolled out of the flask heaven space. When he was in Luoyang, he was still the assistant minister of the secretariat and the emperor's son-in-law. Without sufficient evidence, it wasn't easy to search his soul. Even if Chui Ming was willing, the court had to use gentle methods to search his soul. But because those methods were too gentle, the results were mediocre and couldn't guarantee the results of the soul search. There was also a violent method to search one's soul. It could forcibly read one's memories and there was no way to hide it. But this violent method caused great damage to the primordial spirit and couldn't be recovered. If this method was used on an official in the court just because of suspicion, the order of the Great Zhou court would completely collapse. But Chui Ming didn't have so many restrictions now. He was no longer a 4th-rank official, nor was he the emperor's son-in-law. He was going to die anyway. Before he died, even if he was searched into a lunatic or an idiot, no one would have any objections. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of War glanced at the unconscious Chui Ming. He reached out and pressed his hand on his head. His palm glowed with a white light. Gradually, Chui Ming's body began to twitch unconsciously. His expression was ferocious and the veins on his forehead bulged. His blood vessels wriggled like earthworms. It was obvious that he was in great pain. After a while, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War retracted his hand and said with a solemn expression, "Among the 4 internal guards, other than the woman you captured, there are 4 others who have been bewitched by Cui Ming to become spies for the Meizong sect." Mr. May said in shock, "There are spies in the Meizong sect as well?" The left assistant minister of the Ministry of War nodded and said, "This is just Cui Ming's bewitchment. Who knows how many more spies from the demon sect are hidden in the Great Zhou court." After searching Cui Ming's soul, they only found 4 people. It wasn't a lot, but it wasn't out of Li Mu's expectations. If spies from the demon sect were discovered by the court, only death awaited them. Therefore they kept their identities as spies a secret. In order to ensure that their identities weren't leaked, spies didn't know each other in most cases. They could only contact each other through a single line. Different spies didn't know each other's identities. This method made it so that even if the court found one spy, they couldn't follow the vine to the melon and find more spies. However, this method also had a fatal flaw. This reminded Li Mu of the infernal affairs. If the spies died, their identities would never be exposed. Not to mention the court, even the Meizong sect didn't know that they had such a spy in the court. There was a possibility that if the spy went back on his word or realized that he was promoted faster in the court, as long as he killed the spies, he could completely clear his identity and become a good citizen of the Great Zhou. He could even become an important official in the court. Of course, the benefits of a single line of communication were obvious. Even if the court caught such an important person like Cui Ming, they could only get rid of a few insignificant people in the internal guards. For the Meizong sect, it wasn't much of a loss. Mr. May said with a sullen face, "When His Majesty just ascended the throne, we were too careless when we formed the internal guards. This time when we return to Luoyang, we must completely clean up the internal guards." She looked at Li Mu and asked, "You really don't want to go back with us?" Li Mu shook his head and said, "I've been busy for more than half a year. Let me take a break and spend time with my family." Mr. May wanted to say that His Majesty also needed someone to accompany him. He was the only one in the Great Zhou who could accompany His Majesty. However, she couldn't say it out loud. She could only say, "His Majesty doesn't have many people who can be used. Try to come back as soon as possible." Li Mu nodded and said, I know. Then he glanced at the unconscious Cui Ming who had been violently soul-searched and asked, "What should we do with him?" Mrs. Chu walked over from the side and asked, "Can you leave him to me?" Mr. May and Shangguan Li looked at each other and nodded. Cui Ming was useless now. Bringing him back to Luoyang was also a dead end. He used to be an important official in the court and the emperor's son-in-law. If they brought him back to Luoyang to be executed, everyone would know about it. It would be a loss of face for the court. Mrs. Chu carried the unconscious Cui Ming into Li Mu's former study and closed the door. "Ah, what are you doing? Don't come over. It's all my fault. I beg you to let me go. Let me go." "Ah." In the room, Cui Ming's horrified voice could be heard. At first, he was still able to speak a complete sentence. Later, all that was left was a series of blood-curdling screams. Shangguan Li and Mr. May decisively sealed off their hearing. Li Mu listened to the blood-curdling screams in the room and shuddered. He didn't hesitate to shut off his hearing. After a while, Mrs. Chu walked out of the room expressionlessly. Everything in the room was the same as before. It was as if nothing had changed. However, Cui Ming, who she had just brought in, had completely disappeared. Li Mu sighed in his heart. He probably wouldn't be able to live in this house in peace in the future. It was a pity that his old house. Chapter 321. Cui Ming finally got what he deserved. What goes around comes around. Mrs. Chu died because of him, and he also died in her hands or perhaps in her mouth. Mrs. Chu had been living for revenge for the past 20 years. Now that she had gotten her revenge, she felt a little lost. Mr. May thought for a while and asked, "What do you plan to do in the future?" Mrs. Chu shook her head and said, "I don't know." Mr. May said, "If you don't have anywhere to go, you can come back to Fairy's capital with us. If you're willing to become an internal guard, the Imperial Court can provide you with the resources you need for cultivation." After the spy incident was exposed this time, the internal guards suffered a great loss, especially the 5th Realm Devil Sect spy. Among the internal guards without a 6th realm, he was already considered a core force. Every loss of one was a great loss to the internal guards. Mrs. Chu was strong enough and had a clean background. She was the most suitable person to recruit. Mrs. Chu was obviously hesitant. She looked at Li Mu. Li Mu said, "This is your own business. You can decide for yourself." Mrs. Chu thought for a while and nodded. I'm willing. She had to thank two people for getting her revenge. One was Li Mu and the other was the Empress. Li Mu didn't need her to stay by his side. She could only do something for the Empress to repay her kindness. Mr. Mei and Shangguan Li left under the escort of the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War. Li Mu lay on a stone chair in the courtyard and sighed in relief. It's finally over. He had been worried about Cui Ming's matter for several months, and now the dust had finally settled. He had gotten his revenge on Su He. He had also escaped from the Bay of Clearwater and regained his freedom. He had also reconciled with the female corpse. Li Mu had a lot of things off his mind. He felt relaxed. He lay on the stone chair. A pair of hands rested on his shoulders and gently massaged them. Left, a little to the left. Yes, here. A little to the right. Over, come back a little. Li Mu closed his eyes comfortably. Then he realized that Wan Wan and Xiao Bai were not here. Who was massaging his shoulders. He immediately opened his eyes. Su He looked at him with a smile and asked, "Are you comfortable?" Li Mu stood up and hurriedly said, "I didn't know it was you." Just as he stood up, he was pressed down by Su He. She put her hand on Li Mu's shoulder and said, "You helped me take revenge. Consider it as me repaying you." Li Mu waved his hand and said, "What kind of relationship do we have?" "There's no need to talk about repayment," Su He asked. "What's our relationship?" Li Mu thought for a moment and said, "You saved my life and I saved yours. We are friends of life and death. We are not brother and sister, but we are more than brother and sister." Su He said, "Only brother and sister?" "When we were at the Bay of Clearwater, you called me your wife," Li Mu hurriedly explained. "That was a misunderstanding. I can swear that I never had that kind of thought about you." As soon as he finished speaking, his expression changed. He grabbed her hand and said, "Ah, gentler, it hurts." Su He picked him up and said, "Stinky brother, how can an older sister serve her younger brother? It's your turn to massage me." Women really changed their expressions as quickly as flipping a book. In this regard, Su He and Lu Hanyan were no different. Li Mu stayed at the old mansion for another half a day before preparing to return to Mount Baiyun. Su He had to stay here temporarily to watch over her parents' graves. Li Mu planned to come back and ask her about it before returning to Luoyang. After Li Mu left, Su He stood at the door and watched his figure disappear. Her face no longer had the frivolous and lively expression she had when Li Mu was around. She sighed softly and said with melancholy, "If only I was born 20 years later, how good would that be?" The two ghosts, one big and one small, stood at the door. The small ghost couldn't help but ask Su He, "Sister, why didn't you tell him what was in your heart?" Su He rubbed her head and said, "Humans and ghosts walk different paths. You will understand in the future." She turned and walked into the courtyard, softly humming a nameless song. "When I was born you were not born. When you were born I was already old. When I was far from you, you were at the end of the world. When we were born at the same time, I vowed to be with you. When we were not older, how much did I feel? So close, yet so far, so hard to express my feelings." Li Mu returned to Mount Baiyun and learned that Lu Hanyan still hadn't come out of seclusion. Yu Zhenzi was only one step away from transcendence. She brought Lu Hanyan into seclusion with her, which would be of great benefit to Lu Hanyan. If she could advance to the creation realm a day earlier, Li Mu would be able to fly away with her a day earlier. Without her, Li Mu also went into seclusion on Mount Baiyun. He borrowed a Fulu encyclopedia from Hanja. Li Mu also knew a lot of Fulu, but it was all basic. These basic Fulu books only accounted for less than 1% of the Fulu books in the Fulu school. Apart from a few precious Fulu books, most of the Fulu books in the Fulu school were public. They weren't worried about outsiders stealing their knowledge. On the contrary, whether it was the ancestral court of Fulu school or the major branches, they all hoped that the Fulu school could be carried forward. Naturally, the more people who understood the Tao of Fulu, the better. Fulu school, Spirit Array school and Pill Cauldron school, compared to the South school, North school and Xuanzong school, which had a longer history, were all unconventional. They blazed a new path outside of the great Tao of remarkable abilities, so they paid more attention to the inheritance of the school. Most cultivators could learn the Tao of remarkable abilities, but Fulu, alchemy, and the Tao of formations had a higher requirement of talent. Fulu and alchemy were especially difficult. Almost all cultivators could get started, but if they wanted to take a step further and become a master of talisman and pill Tao, it wouldn't be so easy. The Empress was extremely wealthy, but she could only give Li Mu normal heaven-level Fulu. In the current cultivation world, Fulu mid-level heaven level and above could only be made by Fulu school. If he kept getting Fulu from Lu Hanyan and the Empress, he would be suspected of living off them. As a man, Li Mu's pride wouldn't allow him to keep relying on women. Now that he had enough free time, he could study the Tao of Fulu in Fulu school. In the future he would be able to draw them himself. On White Cloud Peak, Li Mu was in seclusion studying Fulu. In the ghost region of Yudu, on a mountain peak that was forever shrouded by the curtain of night, there was an eerie palace. A black shadow that had just finished his seclusion looked at an extinguished soul lamp in the palace and roared angrily, "Who exactly killed Emperor Song? If I catch you, I will definitely extract your soul and refine it." The few ghost generals that were kneeling in the palace trembled under the pressure of this powerful aura. Chu Jiang of Gojoseon had just died for less than a year, and now Emperor Song had been murdered. In a short period of time, only 8 of the 10 kings of hell were left. In the future they might as well call him the 8th king of hell. The black shadow rushed into the sky and quickly disappeared into the endless night sky. Country of demons, southeast, 100,000 mountains. The southeast of the demon country was adjacent to the northwest of the Great Zhou. The 100,000 mountains spanned the demon country and the Great Zhou, connecting the life continent and the zoo continent. The country of demons wasn't like the Great Zhou, which was a unified country. The demon country was divided by demons. Within the life continent, there were no less than 100 demon countries of various sizes. The larger demon countries ruled over a region, while the smaller demon countries relied on the larger demon countries to survive. In the demon capital of a certain demon country, in the palace, an extremely handsome middle-aged man walked out of an underground secret chamber. Outside the secret chamber, everyone, including the demon king of the demon country, knelt down and said loudly, "Greetings, Heavenly Lord." The handsome middle-aged man said indifferently, "Shui Ming is dead." The men and women kneeling outside the secret chamber were all unusually handsome. One of the men said in shock, "Heavenly Lord already sent a clone to help him. How could he still die?" Could it be that the Great Zhou country sent an expert of the upper realm? The middle-aged man waved his hand, and an image appeared in the sky. In the image there were 7 bloody holes on Shui Ming's body. It was obvious that the clone of the Heavenly Lord had taken over his body. Opposite him was a handsome young man. The young man successively executed 4 types of extremely powerful divine abilities and Dharma spells, which easily destroyed the spirit clone of the Lord of Heaven. After a short moment of silence, there was an uproar. Who is this person? How can he have such a powerful magic art? To be able to kill the clone of the Heavenly Lord so easily, he must be at the 6th realm. But how can there be such a young 6th realm cultivator? This person's magic art is too terrifying. If anyone below the 6th realm encounters him, there is only death. The scene of the Heavenly Lord's clone being killed really shocked everyone. Shui Ming, who was possessed by the Heavenly Lord's clone, had strength that was infinitely close to the 6th realm. But he was killed by this person with a series of magic arts. If it were anyone else, they would also die. In the crowd, Huanji looked at Li Mu in disbelief. If he had shown the strength in the image last time, she probably wouldn't have survived until today. The Heaven Lord of Illusions looked at them and asked, "Do you know who this person is?" Huanji walked forward and said, "Father, his name is Li Mu. He is an official of the Great Zhou. He was the one who almost captured me last time, Li Mu." The Heaven Lord of Illusions said lightly, "If we let him grow, he will definitely become a huge threat to the demon sect. Pass down my order. Anyone who can kill this person will be able to obtain a treasure personally refined by me." Everyone's eyes burned with excitement when they heard this. The Heaven Lord was at the 7th realm. If he could obtain a treasure personally refined by him, it could easily increase his strength and even give him an extra life. But when they thought of how terrifying Li Mu's magic arts were, it was as if a bucket of cold water was poured over their heads. Instantly, they didn't want to think about anything else. The Heaven Lord of Illusions looked at Huanji and said, "That clone was destroyed. I need to go into seclusion for a period of time. I will leave the Mirage sect and Meizong sect to you for the time being. If you encounter something important, you can discuss it with the elders." Huanji bowed and said, "Yes." The Heaven Lord of Illusion's body disappeared into thin air. Huanji raised her head and looked at everyone. She said, "Send a message to all the sections. Whoever can capture Li Mu will be heavily rewarded by the Heaven Lord." "That's right, tell them that I only want him alive, not dead." Everyone nodded and left. Huanji waved the 2 whips in her hands and said, "You better pray that you don't fall into my hands." Although the 10 demon sects were not a whole, there was little hostility between them. Most of the time they cooperated. Between each sect, there was a special method of communication. In just a few days, the news of the Mirage sect and Meizong sect offering a reward for an official named Li Mu spread throughout the 10 demon sects. The reward of the Heaven Lord was extremely attractive to them. For a time, countless people began to inquire about who this Li Mu was. White Cloud Peak. In the dead of night, Li Mu sat cross-legged on his bed and sneezed a few times. He guessed that someone was thinking of him. There was only one person who would think of him in the middle of the night. The northern county was too far away from the divine capital. Ever since he left the divine capital, the Empress could no longer meet him every night through the dream invasion technique. So he picked up the spirit conch and used his magic power to activate it. He sent a message, "Your Majesty, are you asleep?" Chapter 322. Just as Li Mu had guessed, the Empress was single and didn't have a nightlife. She hadn't slept yet. Actually, when Li Mu was in Chengdu, she still had a nightlife. Her nightlife was to run into Li Mu's dreams, play chess with him, and teach him how to cultivate. After Li Mu left Chengdu, she had nothing to do at night. Li Mu felt that if the Empress were to give him the Best Minister of Great Zhou award, it could only go to him. Even when he was on vacation, he didn't forget to do things for her. He saved Shangguanli and captured Cui Ming. After finishing his work, he still had to worry about the Empress's private affairs. He was worried that she would be lonely at night, so he even called her to ask about her. From his conversation with the Empress, Li Mu learned that many things had happened in Chengdu while he was away. The biggest one was Mr. May's purge of the internal guards. Other than a few demon sect spies who were found and executed, the internal guards had also undergone a major change. When the Empress had just ascended the throne, she had nothing but the throne. The entire imperial court was controlled by the old and new parties. The establishment of the inner guards was a way for her to cultivate her own strength. However, because the inner guards were established in a hurry, the quality of the inner guards was uneven. In the past few years, after the Empress's position was stabilized, these problems were gradually exposed. However, there weren't many internal guards to begin with. After the purge, they were obviously understaffed. After being warned by the demon sect spies, Mr. May and Shangguanli would rather be understaffed in the future than make up the numbers. If they were infiltrated by someone with ulterior motives, it would cause even more trouble in the future. This time, if Li Mu hadn't coincidentally returned to Beijing, Shangguanli's team would have been wiped out, and even more powerful cultivators from the court would have been killed. After talking about Chengdu, the Empress suddenly asked, "Did you teach anyone else the chant you taught me last time?" Li Mu didn't know why all the women would care about this question. They weren't Lin Daiyu and the chant wasn't a thing. Why couldn't the chant be taught to them? In the end, Li Mu nodded and said, "Yes." The Empress was silent for a moment, then asked, "Who else?" Li Mu said honestly, "Other than your Majesty, there is also my fiancée, a little girl by her side, Xiaobai, and a friend of mine." The Empress was silent for a while before asking, "Is that friend of yours a man or a woman? Can he be trusted?" Li Mu nodded and said, "She is a woman and one of the people this subject trusts the most. She is also the first person other than this subject to know this chant." The Empress reminded him, "Recently, I have discovered that this mnemonic chant is not as simple as it seems. It is best that you do not spread it out so easily." This was something Li Mu had told Li Qing when he taught the Clear Heart chant to her. Although the Clear Heart chant didn't have any attack power in Li Mu's mind, it was undoubtedly the strongest support chant. If one's mind was unstable, it could be used to clear one's mind. If one was trapped in an illusion, it could be used to break the illusion. It could keep one's mind clear when one's soul was being controlled, and it could also keep one's mind clear when one was writing talismans. The former could be used to steal the sky and fake the sun, and the latter's effect was even more heaven-defying. It could increase the success rate of writing high-level fulu, and it could greatly save the time and materials needed to write talismans. In the same amount of time, the Clear Heart chant could write 10 fulu that could originally only be written once. The same materials, 9 batches would be wasted to make 1 fulu. Now, perhaps one wouldn't even need to waste a single batch. Li Mu knew better than anyone that if one had an endless supply of high-grade talismans in one's possession during a battle, then it would cause a great psychological trauma to one's opponent. It could be said that a single heart-cleansing technique would allow the Talisman Puppet sect to become the #1 sect in the Tao sects. There were too many stakes involved in this. Thus, Li Qing reminded him that it was best not to spread this mnemonic chant. Up until now, the people that Li Mu taught were all his own people. Whether it was Lu Hanyan, Wanwan, or Xiaobai, Li Mu hoped that they would have more trump cards to protect themselves. To him, compared to their safety, he didn't care at all which sect was the number one Taoist sect. Lu Hanyan was his fiancée, Wanwan was her dowry, and Xiaobai would be with him for the rest of his life. As for Li Qing, he had an irreplaceable position in Li Mu's heart. No matter how you looked at it, only the Empress was an outsider. Li Mu thought for a moment, then said, "This mnemonic chant was passed down to me by Master. There's no need to spread it. I'll make an exception and pass it down to Her Majesty. I hope that Her Majesty won't spread it out again." In Chengdu, in Chang'an Palace, Zhou Yi's face was filled with indignation. He had passed down this mnemonic chant to so many people, and none of them were considered exceptions. Why was it that when it came to her, it was an exception? To think that she had been so good to him and rewarded him with so many things. She had even given him the precious origin pill. Whenever she encountered a good tribute, she would leave a portion for him. She had even made a life talisman for him. In the end, she was just an outsider who had made an exception? This made her feel that her sincerity had been misplaced. No more sounds came from the other side, and this made Li Mu a little vigilant. The Empress's thinking time was usually between 1 to 3 breaths. After 3 breaths, it would be an abnormal pause. What was it that caused her to pause abnormally? It was already late at night, and no one in the palace would dare to disturb her. In other words, the cause of her abnormal pause was very likely Li Mu himself. Could it be that what he had said was wrong? Li Mu's mind spun rapidly, and he immediately realized that he had made a fatal mistake. The Empress was someone who was extremely lacking in love. If he loved her, she would return it tenfold. However, if he made her feel that there was no love, the damage to her would be several times greater than that of a normal person. What he had said just now might have made her feel that she was an outsider. Li Mu's mind spun rapidly. In an instant he thought of countless ways to apologize and explain, but they were all rejected by him in an instant. All apologies and explanations were made up after the fact. Making up after the fact would never allow a relationship to return to how it was before. Li Mu made a prompt decision and adjusted his emotions. He sighed slowly and said, "When Your Majesty heard what I said just now, did you also feel that I did not treat Your Majesty as one of my own? Did you feel that I had misplaced my sincerity?" Zhou Yi was clearly stunned. Li Mu's words directly pointed out her true thoughts. Her lips moved and she was about to speak, but Li Mu did not give her the chance. He sighed again and said, "I only said one sentence to Your Majesty, and Your Majesty already felt this way. Last time Your Majesty was so cold to me, so heartless. Compared to what I just said, Your Majesty was 1,000 times, 10,000 times more hurtful. Your Majesty should now know how sad I was that time. Bringing up old scores and making false accusations." This was a move that Li Mu had learned from some women in his previous life. When he was at his wit's end, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration and used it without even thinking. This move was very exquisite. In a situation where he was in the wrong, by bringing up old scores and making false accusations, he could instantly turn from passive to active. For people like Lu Hanyan and Su He who were smart, using this move naturally meant that he did not want to die quickly enough. However, against someone like the Empress who was Xiaobai, this was simply the best weapon. As expected, after Li Mu spoke, the Empress did not mention what had just happened. Instead, her voice was somewhat flustered as she said, "What happened last time, it was my fault. Why do you still remember?" Seeing that this move was effective, Li Mu struck while the iron was hot and said, "How could I forget? That was the greatest grievance I had suffered in my life. Even now, when I think about it, I still find it hard to calm down. Let's stop here for today. I will go to bed first." "Good night, Your Majesty." After saying that, Li Mu put down the conch and let out a long sigh of relief. Although he acted like an unreasonable and unruly girlfriend just now, it was better for the Empress to feel that Li Mu had been left out than for her to feel that she had been left out. After all, if he was wronged, it would be fine with a little coaxing. If the Empress was wronged, Li Mu would have to suffer a few lashes, and she might not even be able to forgive him. In Chang'an Palace, Zhou Yi was lying on the bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. She hesitated in her heart. Should she wait until Li Mu returned to Chengdu and simply erase this memory of him? On Baiyun Peak there was no danger tonight. Li Mu slept on Lu Hanyan's bed and quickly fell asleep. In his dream he met the Empress again. The Empress looked at him anxiously and said, "My dear concubine, this matter is really my fault. Listen to my explanation." Li Mu covered his ears and shook his head. "I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen, I don't want to listen." In the room, Li Mu suddenly jumped up from the bed. He covered his face and said with endless fear, "No." In the morning, Li Mu woke up early and walked around the peaks of Baiyun Peak to relax. Recently he seemed to have some mental problems. This made Li Mu quite worried. He was a dignified man, how could he have such strange dreams? He thought about it carefully and quickly found the problem. Last night, he used the method of bringing up old scores and making false accusations to deal with the Empress. This was not a method that a man should use. He had positioned himself as the Empress's unruly boyfriend, so he should not complain about having such dreams at night. In the future he could not treat the Empress like this. Any reasonable and normal person would not do such a thing. If this continued, this dream would probably never end. The scenery of Baiyun Peak was very beautiful. Li Mu walked around for a while, and the fear in his heart gradually dissipated. Unknowingly he arrived at the main peak. At this time, it was time for the main peak's disciples to have their morning classes. Close to 100 disciples sat cross-legged in the square in front of the main peak's Tao Palace. They had their eyes closed and were meditating. Above their heads, a huge bell floated there. It slowly and rhythmically rang. Under the ethereal sound of the bell, all the distracting thoughts in the hearts of the disciples were washed away. In the square, the disciples cultivated quietly. In the sky above the square, cranes danced and white clouds lingered. Everything was so harmonious. Buzz. In the next instant, the sound of the Tao bell suddenly became countless times louder. Screech. A few flying cranes let out a cry and fell straight down from the sky. Under the sound of the bell, the faces of the Fulu school disciples in the square flushed red. The magic power in their bodies surged. Chapter 323. Because of the unbelievable nightmare last night, Li Mu had been worried about his psychological problems this morning. He had completely forgotten that the ancestral court of Fulu School, on the main peak of White Cloud Mountain, had a grudge with him. Li Mu's grudge with the Tao bell was purely accidental. He did not know that the bell could sense the first Tao technique that descended into this world. Then, because of the Tao Te Ching, it overreacted and a deep crack appeared on the bell. But no matter what, the Tao bell had cracked because of him. Now, it was hiding from him whenever it saw him. Li Mu had obviously scared it. The last sound of the bell did not sound right. The red-crowned cranes flying in the sky were stunned by the sound of the bell. They fell from the sky to the square, their bodies twitching non-stop. Most of the disciples in the square also fainted from the shock. Li Mu knew that he had caused trouble. He was about to escape when the Tao bell ran faster than him. With a whoosh, it flew into the clouds and floated there, not daring to come down. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. On the main peak, several figures rushed into the sky from the various Tao palaces. Seeing the mess on the square, everyone was shocked. What happened to the red-crowned cranes? Why did so many disciples faint? Why did the Tao bell run away again? What was that sound just now? Gave me a fright. My hand even trembled. It's a pity that my Fulu painting was almost finished. The elders of the main peak floated above the square and looked at each other in confusion. Then, someone looked at the edge of the square and saw a figure preparing to escape. It's him. Why is he here? I see, so he's junior sister Lu's Tao partner. I was wondering why the bell was so scared. Li Mu originally wanted to run away, but he had been recognized so quickly. He could only turn around and bite the bullet. Well, I really didn't do it on purpose. A few elders descended from the sky. Some began to treat the twitching red-crowned cranes, while others began to wake up the unconscious disciples. An old man with a creation realm cultivation walked over and smiled at Li Mu. It's okay. It's not the first time the Tao bell has changed. I know you didn't mean it. Buzz. In the clouds above the square, the law bell rang again, clearly venting its displeasure. Not long after, the red-crowned crane flew back into the clouds. However, it did not dare to stay on White Cloud Peak. It flew towards a distant mountain. The disciples who were knocked unconscious by the sound of the bell gradually regained consciousness. Each of them had a blank expression on their faces. What happened? Why did I suddenly faint just now? The Tao bell suddenly went crazy. Look, isn't that the person who made the Tao bell go crazy last time? He's here again. Feeling the gazes of everyone in the square begin to gather on him, Li Mu knew in his heart that he shouldn't stay here for long. He cupped his hands towards the old man and said, I'm sorry to have caused you trouble. I still have some matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first. After saying that, he quickly walked out of the square and flew towards White Cloud Peak. Above the white clouds, the bell swayed for a moment, then slowly descended. It seemed to have sensed something and began to circle around the spot where Li Mu had been standing. The elders were perplexed by its strange behavior. For thousands of years the Tao bell had been very normal. Nothing had ever happened to it. Why was it that every time that person came to the main peak, it seemed to have changed into a different bell, White Cloud Peak? Li Mu returned to the small building on the peak and sat cross-legged on the bed. He swore that he would never set foot on the main peak again. Although it was the Tao bell that was afraid of him, not the other way around, this Tao bell had existed since the establishment of the ancestral court of Fulu school. It had been more than 1,000 years since then, and it had even developed its own intelligence. This kind of magic treasure had already surpassed the heavenly rank. It could not even be called a magic treasure anymore but a type of monster. Although it could not transform, if it wanted to go against Li Mu might not be its match. However, the Tao bell's intelligence did not seem to be very high. It had not realized this yet. Li Mu could not give it a chance to react. After returning to White Cloud Peak and heaving a sigh of relief, Li Mu began to recall the feeling of killing the illusion god's avatar that day. That was the first time he had released the demon-slaying protective curse. Based on Li Mu's understanding of this curse, the first 2 moves of this curse could be used by Realm 4 cultivators. However, the last 2 moves were Realm 5 Abhijna. Among them, the third move was a defensive move. The Taiji diagram that was formed could even dissolve a Realm 6 attack. The last move seemed to specialize in attacking the primordial spirit. The speed of the Sword of Wisdom was unbelievably fast. The illusion god's avatar did not even have time to react before his primordial spirit was destroyed. Li Mu still did not understand the use of the Tao Te Ching. The 9 syllables of truth were mostly supportive. The demon-slaying protective curse was the strongest Tao technique that Li Mu could use at the moment. With the support of the last 2 moves and with Su He by his side, he was not afraid of ordinary Realm 6 cultivators. It seemed like he had only crossed half a realm. However, this half a realm was something that 99% of Realm 5 cultivators could not cross. Li Mu sat cross-legged on the bed and continued to comprehend. Suddenly he sensed something and opened his eyes to look ahead. Outside the window a shadow flashed past. Li Mu flew off the bed and came to the courtyard. However, he did not see anything. He pretended to return to his room. However, he suddenly turned around and looked up at the sky. A corner of the Tao bell appeared in the clouds above his head. However, it quickly shrank back. Li Mu was shocked. Did the Tao bell finally understand that he was no match for him? Was it here to seek revenge? However, it did not seem like it. Li Mu only glanced at it and it hid in the clouds. If it was here to seek revenge, it would not be so cowardly. Li Mu turned and walked back to his room. However, he secretly stuck a paper figurine on the door. After he entered the room, he silently observed from the paper figurine's perspective. In the clouds, the Tao bell's shadow appeared again. It first carefully lowered its height. When it saw that Li Mu did not come out, it quickly flew to where Li Mu was standing and slowly rotated. Li Mu looked at it strangely. He did not know what the Tao bell was up to. He carefully observed the Tao bell through the paper figurine. The Tao bell was about 10 feet tall. Its body was so thick that it would take several people to wrap their arms around it. Li Mu had not looked at it carefully before. Now that he looked at it closely, he realized that there were complicated runes on the Tao bell. These runes were simple and ancient, but they were also quite beautiful. However, there was a deep crack on the Tao bell. While it destroyed a few of the runes, it also destroyed some of the Tao bell's beauty. The culprit behind this crack was Li Mu. Li Mu was actually quite aggrieved about this matter. He had only recited a few incantations. Reciting incantations was not against the law. The Tao bell seemed to have a function. It was to magnify the changes in the power of heaven and earth caused by new magical powers and Tao techniques. When Li Mu cast a spell in Yangqiu County, the changes in the power of heaven and earth were not felt by the powerhouses of Mount Baiyun. However, the Tao bell could magnify the fluctuations. Li Mu could imagine what it would be like when it tried to magnify the power of heaven and earth caused by the Tao Te Ching. Even someone as reckless as Li Mu would not dare to recite it casually unless it was a matter of life and death. He wished that its power would be weakened by 10 times or even 100 times. This Tao bell actually wanted to magnify it. It was simply seeking death more than Li Mu himself. However, even though Dao Zhong was courting death, Li Mu still couldn't shirk his responsibility in this matter. He carefully observed the Tao bell's rotation on the spot. He was gradually surprised to find that as it rotated, the edge of the crack on the Tao bell emitted an extremely weak golden light. Li Mu was stunned. Could this Tao bell be repairing itself? But why did it come here to repair itself? Could it be that there was something around Li Mu that could help it repair itself? Li Mu carefully probed and did not feel anything unusual around him. However, the Dao Bell's spiritual sense was many times stronger than that of a human. Perhaps it could sense something that Li Mu could not. Li Mu walked out of the room again. The Dao Bell immediately flew up and hid in the clouds again. Li Mu stood in the courtyard and looked at the clouds and the sky. He said, "You don't have to hide anymore. I can see you." The Dao Bell flew out from the clouds and buzzed non-stop. It was unknown what it was saying. Although Li Mu could not understand its words, it was obvious that the Dao Bell could understand Li Mu's meaning. Li Mu looked up at it and said, "I didn't do it on purpose last time. Come down." The Dao Bell buzzed for a while. Not only did it not come down but it flew even higher. Li Mu thought for a while and said, "I swear on the heavenly Dao that I won't do anything to you. I'll just stand here and not move." After the Dao Bell stopped in the air for a while, it seemed like it wanted to escape, but it also seemed like it couldn't bear to let go of something. After a while it tried to descend a little, then a little more. When it saw that Li Mu didn't move, it gradually became bolder and flew to Li Mu's side. It circled around him continuously. Li Mu noticed that there were more golden light spots on the cracks on the Dao Bell. The cracks seemed to be slowly mending at a speed that was not visible to the naked eye. This meant that he had something that the Dao Bell needed. However, Li Mu carefully probed and did not find anything missing. It was not spiritual power, psyche power, or any other power within his body. After the Dao Bell spun for a while, the golden light spots on the cracks dissipated, and the cracks seemed to be mending a little. Li Mu could not figure it out. He simply said, "I was the one who caused the cracks on your body. I have the responsibility to help you repair them. What do you need? I can help you." Li Mu had clearly gained some trust from the Dao Bell. The Dao Bell buzzed again. Although there were no specific syllables or words, Li Mu miraculously understood its meaning. Li Mu asked in surprise, "You need a new mystique Dao technique?" The Dao Bell danced up and down, clearly indicating that it was nodding. Li Mu reached out and touched the cracks on the Dao Bell. This time the Dao Bell not only did not dodge but it even rubbed against his hand. However, it was huge and Li Mu was almost knocked over by it. He patted the Dao Bell and said casually, "You're so big. It's not convenient for you to be beside me. Can you shrink a little?" The Dao Bell buzzed and shrank rapidly. Finally, it became a small bell the size of a palm. It jumped up and down and circled around Li Mu. Li Mu looked at the scene in front of him in shock and exclaimed, "It really can." Chapter 324. It was Li Mu who had cracked the Fulu School's Dao Bell, so he had the responsibility to repair it. According to the message conveyed by the Dao Bell, every time a new Dao technique or divine ability was created, a strange power would descend. It relied on this strange power to repair itself. In theory, as long as Li Mu could continuously create new divine abilities or Dao techniques, it would quickly be repaired. Although Li Mu did not have this ability, he had the support of Taoism from another world. Speaking of which, there were many things that were fated to happen. In his previous life he had been seriously ill. He had tried Western medicine and traditional Chinese medicine, but none of them were effective. His mother had suffered a blow because of this, but she did not want to give up. In the end, she had placed her hopes on metaphysics. During that time she had worshipped and entered every temple she saw. She had brought home Buddhist beads consecrated by eminent monks and Fulu personally written by a half-immortal. Not only that, but because of Li Mu's illness, his mother, who had originally been an atheist, had also started to worship Buddhism and Taoism. She had bought a lot of Buddhist and Taoist scriptures and read them day and night, praying for Buddha and Taoists to bless Li Mu's recovery. Even though Li Mu did not believe in metaphysics at that time, he did not want his mother to lose hope. Therefore he forced himself to memorize some Buddhist scriptures and Taoist scriptures. When he had nothing to do, he would flip through the mountains of books at home. However, ever since his parents had gone to a mountain to worship Buddha and their car had accidentally rolled off a cliff, Li Mu had never touched these things again. After coming to this world, Li Mu gradually realized that the things he had abandoned in the past had great power in this world. Unfortunately, Li Mu had already used the 9 words mantra, the demon-slaying protection incantation, and other Dao techniques countless times. What the Dao Bell needed could only be found when a Dao technique first appeared. However, this was not a problem. There were many Taoist Dharma spells. Just the Thunder Dharma alone had more than 100 types of Dharma spells. Although they were all Thunder Dharma spells, their powers were all different. The Lin formula was the fastest and strongest Thunder Dharma spell. The others appeared to be of little value. Li Mu did not even try them. Although it was of little value, it was something that had never existed in this world before. Once it was used, it would be a brand new divine ability. Apart from these, there were too many spells in the Exalted 3 Divine Caves incantation that Li Mu didn't try. The reason was that although many spells had different incantations and hand seals, their effects were the same. There were countless types of lightning spells and it was enough to learn one. Since there were already ready-made spells in this world, Li Mu didn't need to spend a lot of time and energy trying out the corresponding hand seals. He only felt a little regretful now. If he had known that this day would come, he would have read all the Taoist and Buddhist scriptures. Perhaps he would have more trump cards now. Li Mu put these thoughts away. When he was in Jianghu County, he had spent a lot of time trying out the incantations that he remembered. At that time he had only condensed one spirit of cultivation. Many times, when he felt that using those Dharma spells would backfire on him, he would immediately stop. Now that his cultivation had reached the level of divine ability, it was naturally no problem for him to use those Dharma spells of the past. Li Mu's left hand formed the thunder seal and said silently, "Flying hellfire, divine thunder. Up and down Tai Chi, the 4 dimensions of the world. Overturning the heavens and overturning the mountains, boiling the seas and destroying the mountains. The 6th dragon drum vibrates and orders the pursuit, urgent as the Dharma commands." As his voice fell, a white thunderbolt descended from the sky. Li Mu waved his hand and dispersed it. The Tao bell, which had already turned into the size of Li Mu's palm, let out a crisp sound. It spun around Li Mu. Golden spots of light began to appear on the cracks on the bell. Seeing that this method was indeed effective, Li Mu's hand seal changed into the green spirit seal. He silently chanted the snow prayer incantation, "Flying hellfire, east spirit. Superior immortal master, auspicious light condenses. Astral wind scissors water, change jade flower. Majestic righteousness, heaven and earth cleanse. True king perfunctory, divine transformation jade sutra. Urgent as the Dharma commands." Not long after the incantation was finished, snowflakes fluttered in the air and fell from the sky. The Tao bell flew up and down in the snow. It was as lively as a dog. Li Mu stretched out his hand. A snowflake landed on his hand and slowly melted. In the past, he had thought that only spells that used insignificant cultivation to stir up the power of heaven and earth could be called Taoist spells. Later on, he gradually realized that spells that were classified as supernatural powers, such as summoning wind and summoning rain and praying snow, could also be called Taoist spells. The essence of Taoist spells was to use one's own Dharma powers to trigger changes in heaven and earth. The reason why they were not classified as Taoist spells was because cultivators were used to thinking that Taoist spells were bound to be powerful. These spells were not worthy of being called Taoist spells. However, to Li Mu, although these spells were not very powerful, they could still be of great use when gathered together. However, Li Mu did not intend to hand over all his stock today. He stroked the Tao bell and said, "Let's call it a day. We'll come back tomorrow." The Tao bell circled around Li Mu a few times. It seemed to be reluctant to part with him. After a long time, it turned into a stream of light and disappeared in the direction of the main peak. Wanwan and Xiaobai had run off somewhere. Li Mu returned to his room. He was bored to death. He took out the spirit snail and inserted a strand of Dharma powers. From last night until now, Zhou Yi's heart had been restless. She thought countless times about whether what she did to Li Mu in the past was too much. If he was angry, what would she do if he stayed in the North County and did not return to the divine capital? Should she sincerely apologize to him? She did not sleep the whole night. She kept thinking about this problem. Until Li Mu's voice came from the spirit snail. He seemed to have forgotten about last night's unhappiness and did not mention it again. Only then did Zhou Yi relax. At the same time she was also gratified. Although he was sometimes petty and willful, he was still very reasonable most of the time. Today, when he was chatting with the Empress, Li Mu did not dare to be unreasonable. He had thought about it thoroughly today. The Empress was so innocent. It was too inhumane to use such tricks on such an innocent girl. Of course, he was also worried that he would have nightmares again at night. Li Mu did not mention what happened last night. He only mentioned the Tao bell to the Empress. Tao bell? After hearing this, Zhou Yi said, "I've only heard that it is the spiritual treasure of the Fulu school. I've never seen it before." Fulu school was one of the 6 Taoist sects. Li Mu originally thought that the spiritual treasure of such a sect would be very impressive. He did not expect such a cowardly bell to be the spiritual treasure of a sect. In Li Mu's eyes, it seemed to have no other use other than being a Taoist detector. Zhou Yi continued, according to historical records, the ancestral court of Fulu School has encountered many crises in the history of the school. They were all resolved by this bell. Li Mu was stunned. He said in disbelief, "This bell is so powerful?" Zhou Yi said, "This bell is not ordinary. Its sound can not only purify one's Taoist heart, but it can also be used to shock enemies. The bell can be big or small. When it is small, it is like sand. When it is big, it is like a mountain. It is also the strongest defensive treasure known to the cultivation world. Hundreds of years ago, when the ancestral court of Fulu School was besieged by the demon sect, it was the Tao bell that covered Mount Baiyun. The demon sect's several transcendents and more than 10 Dongxin experts were unable to break through. Li Mu was extremely suspicious. Was the Tao bell that ran away when it saw him and the Tao bell that the Empress was talking about the same? If the Tao bell was really so powerful, how could it be cracked because of the Tao Te Ching? Li Mu quickly realized that this might not be the Tao bell's fault. It dared to infinitely amplify the power of heaven and earth activated by the Tao Te Ching. The fact that the Tao bell had only cracked a small crack was enough to show its strength. If that was the case, if he obtained the Tao bell and couldn't defeat his opponent head-on, all he had to do was shrink into the bell and he would be in an invincible position. This was the direction that a qualified cultivator should strive to cultivate in. He didn't expect the cowardly bell to be so powerful. When he thought about hiding in the Tao bell and fighting, Li Mu's heart immediately burned with passion. He couldn't help but look forward to the next day. After chatting with the Empress for a while, Li Mu put away the conch and sorted out the spells in his mind that he hadn't used yet. The next morning, Li Mu woke up early and went to the courtyard. At the same time, on the main peak, nearly 100 disciples of the Flu school had also started their daily morning classes. For cultivators, cultivating the heart was extremely important. Once the heart of cultivation wasn't firm or unstable, one's cultivation would stagnate and regress. In serious cases, one would suffer from qi deviation or even death. Thus, the disciples of the 7 branches would take turns every 7 days to ascend the main peak and listen to the sound of the Tao bell. The Tao bell was the treasure of the Flu school. It emitted a certain sound that could cleanse a cultivator's heart and reduce the possibility of inner demons breeding. A group of disciples sat cross-legged in the square in front of the Tao palace on the main peak. They closed their eyes and focused, preparing to be cleansed by the Tao bell. However, they sat for a long time and didn't hear the sound of the bell. Finally, someone couldn't help but look up. He realized that there were only a few white clouds above his head. There was no sign of the Tao bell. He was stunned. "Where's the bell?" "White cloud peak." Li Mu withdrew his hand and looked at the Tao bell that was flying toward him. A fervent smile appeared on his face. If the Empress hadn't reminded him, he wouldn't have realized that the Tao bell was a treasure. If he could trick it into his hands. Thinking of this, Li Mu's smile widened. The Tao bell that was flying toward him suddenly stopped. Then, as if it had been frightened, it quickly retreated and hid in the clouds. Li Mu was stunned. Could it be that his smile was too perverted and scared the cowardly bell? He coughed softly and tried his best to make his smile normal. He waved his hand at the cloud and said, "Come down. I just cast a new spell for you." The Tao bell peeked out a corner of the cloud and quickly retreated. Li Mu thought to himself that he had been careless. Given the Tao bell's personality, if he scared it this time, it probably wouldn't be so easy to get close to it next time. Li Mu didn't say anything else. His hand gestures changed rapidly as he silently chanted a spell. Jade Purity Signal, Descend the Lightning. 3 departments and 6 residences, left and right Spirit Lords. Crystal of the Sun, Flowing Light of the Moon. Sweep away the evil and destroy all disasters. The Celestial Emperor receives the wind and commands the sky. In thy name in my palm. Grasp the heaven and earth, protect me. After casting several new spells in succession, a buzzing sound finally came from the clouds. The Tao bell flew out of the clouds and cheerfully flew toward Li Mu. Chapter 325. Baiyun Mountain Main Peak Plaza. The morning class had already begun, but the Tao bell did not ring. A few elders walked out of the Tao palace and looked at the chaotic disciples in the plaza. They asked, "What's going on?" A disciple said in fear, "Elder, the Tao bell ran away." The elder's expression changed. "What?" The Tao bell was an important treasure of Baiyun Mountain. For thousands of years, it had saved the ancestral court from danger several times. Fulu school had always treated it like an ancestor. If anything happened to the Tao bell, the entire Baiyin Mountain would experience an earthquake. The elders asked in unison, "Where did the Tao bell go?" A disciple pointed in a certain direction and said, "I saw the Tao bell go that way just now." The elders flew up at the same time and flew in the direction that the disciple pointed. When they passed by Baiyin Mountain, they suddenly heard a crisp and cheerful bell ring from below. They immediately stopped. Hearing the Tao bell ring again, everyone was relieved. They flew down Baiyin Mountain to investigate. The Tao bell flew away from the main peak during the morning class. This had never happened in decades. They floated in the air and saw a young man standing in the courtyard of the small building on Baiyin Mountain. The Tao bell had shrunk to the size of a palm and was flying around him. It looked extremely cheerful. When they saw the young man's appearance, everyone was stunned. Yesterday the Tao bell was so scared that it hid in the clouds and did not dare to come out. Why did it become like this today? They had been on Baiyin Mountain for decades, but they had never seen the Tao bell so close to anyone. The thoughts of a spiritual treasure were truly difficult to guess. However, it was fine as long as the Tao bell was still in Fulu school. An elder looked down and said, "Senior Tao bell, the disciples on the main peak are still waiting for you." Limu looked at the Tao bell and said, "That's all for today. I'll continue to help you another day." The Tao bell reluctantly flew around Limu a few times. Then it drew an arc in the air and flew towards the main peak. Several elders nodded to Limu in the sky, then left with doubtful looks on their faces. The Tao bell held an extraordinary significance to Fulu school. Anything related to the Tao bell was no small matter. After the morning class, in the Tao Palace on the main peak, several elders immediately reported this matter to the headmaster. Dao Zhong left the morning class for no reason. This has never happened in the past few decades. There must be something fishy going on. Yesterday it was very afraid of fellow Taoist Li, but today it has become so close. There must be a reason. This is an important matter. Sect leader, you must pay attention to it. On the main seat, the white-haired old man pinched his fingers and calculated. Then he said, he should have something to hide the secrets of the heavens. I can't calculate the relationship between him and the Tao bell. One of the elders said doubtfully, why would he have such an item for no reason? He has approached Fulu school several times. There must be some unspeakable secret between him and the Tao bell. Could he be a spy from the demon sect who approached Fulu school with ill intentions towards the Tao bell? Another Taoist priest said, Elder Su, you think too highly of the demon sect. Not only is he junior sister Lu's future Taoist companion, but he is also the Empress' favorite minister. Do you think the Empress of Great Zhou would treat a spy from the demon sect as her favorite minister? That's true. Elder Su shook his head and asked, but what happened between him and the Tao bell? I have been in the sect for several decades, but I have never seen such a phenomenon. The Fulu school's head teacher's lips trembled slightly. A moment later the Tao bell flew in from outside. It circled the Fulu school's head teacher and buzzed for a while. The Fulu school's head teacher stood up and observed the cracks on the Tao bell. Not long after, a look of surprise appeared on his face. He muttered, there's such a thing? Everyone rarely saw such an expression on the head teacher's face. They asked curiously, head teacher, what happened? The head teacher said, he is helping the Tao bell repair the cracks on it. The elders could not help but be shocked when they heard this. How is that possible? Repairing the Tao bell requires the origin energy of heaven and earth. The origin energy of heaven and earth is extremely rare. It can only be produced in large quantities when a new Taoist technique is produced. Once the origin energy is produced, it will dissipate soon and cannot be stored. How can he have it? What method did he use to help the Tao bell repair it? The Tao bell buzzed a few more times. The Fulu school's head teacher revealed a look of understanding. He said, I see. A moment later they learned the whole story. In the Tao Palace on the main peak, the elders looked at each other in shock. Limu really was using the origin energy of heaven and earth produced when a new Taoist technique was produced to repair the Tao bell. This matter was far more unbelievable than him being able to repair the Tao bell. There was no way to verify how the earliest Taoist techniques were created. Most of the Taoist techniques that the current cultivators practiced were inherited from the ancients. However, in every era, there was no lack of outstanding people who could create their own Taoist techniques. These people were often the brightest stars in the night sky of that era. Even the head teacher could not compare to these people. It was not just the head teacher. The transcendence of the 6 Taoist sects, the 4 Buddhist sects, the 10 demonic path sects, the deans of the Great Zhou's 4 great academies, and even the Empress of the Great Zhou, these were the strongest people known on the continent. but they were far from being outstanding. They were able to advance to the transcendence realm by relying on the legacies of their sects, academies, and the imperial court. They relied on the influence of their predecessors and did not rely on themselves. The imperial family had the emperor's qi. The academies and the various sects also had their own legacies. Strictly speaking, they could not be considered true transcendents. A true transcendence expert was someone who transcended the rules and traditions. They created their own Taoist techniques and were able to embark on their own path of cultivation. Li Mu was clearly not such a genius. If he could create a Taoist technique of this level, a great phenomenon would descend on Mount Baiyun. At that time, everyone would be able to sense it. Even so, the fact that he was able to innovate within the traditional framework was not something an ordinary cultivator could do. At least no one in the Fulu school could do it. In the current cultivation world, perhaps only some of Xuanzong's seniors had such abilities. The Fulu school was dedicated to researching Fulu. Xuanzong was passionate about researching Taoist techniques. For thousands of years, Xuanzong had made many improvements to the existing Taoist techniques. For example, they shortened the incantations, simplified the hand seals, sped up the casting time, increased the power of the Taoist techniques, and so on. Li Mu had done these. Of course, his Taoist techniques, incantations, and hand seals might not be shorter or fewer, but they were still considered new Taoist techniques. He used this method to obtain the origin power of heaven and earth to help repair the Tao Bell. Elder Su praised, "Even so, it's very rare for him to have such an understanding of Taoist techniques at such a young age." Another Taoist priest said, "If Senior Miao Dun of Xuanzong knew about this, she would probably regret it very much." Last time she invited fellow Taoist Li to join Xuanzong. After being rejected, she did not insist. If fellow Taoist Li joins Xuanzong, he will definitely become a prodigy of Xuanzong in the future. The Fulu school's headmaster's eyes lit up. He said, "I'm afraid that in the future, a true transcendence expert will appear in Great Zhou." The sect master's words caused the elders to be extremely astonished. Everyone knew very well what a true transcendence expert meant. It had been too many years since a true transcendence expert appeared in the cultivation world. A powerhouse who relied on his own strength to step into the upper realm without relying on an inheritance was far stronger than an ordinary transcendence expert. They did not expect the headmaster to have such a high evaluation of him. At first they felt that it was too much. Thinking about it carefully, when others cursed the heavens, there was a certain possibility of being struck by lightning. The scene of him cursing the heavens was earth-shattering. Even the Tao Bell cracked because of it. Although his cultivation was not high in terms of understanding of the heavenly Tao, there were probably not many people who could compare to him. Elder Su thought for a moment and said, "If such a person can stay in our Fulu school, it's very likely that he will become a pillar of the ancestral court in the future." Another elder sighed and said, "It's too late. Half a year ago it was still possible. Now he's already one of the Empress people. If we keep him in the Fulu school, even if he's willing, the Empress won't be willing. Moreover, he has refused to join the sect twice. This time he probably won't agree." Elder Su thought of something and said with a smile, "It's fine. With junior sister Lu here, he's already half a member of the Fulu school. As long as we treat him well, he'll always treat our Fulu school differently. In addition, he's a favored official of the Empress. Perhaps he can further deepen our relationship with the imperial court." After the Tao Bell left, Li Mu waited on Baiyun Peak. According to his guest, the main peak would send someone over soon. The Tao Bell was the most important treasure of the Fulu school. They would definitely not let Li Mu seduce it. They would definitely come to ask about it. In this short period of time, Li Mu had even prepared an excuse. If they asked, he would say that these spells were all inherited from his master. Although they might not believe him, they would not search his soul to confirm it. Not to mention that searching his soul was useless. Even if the Fulu school was one of the 6 great Taoist sects, they would not dare to treat him this way. Now he did not represent himself alone. Behind him stood the Empress and the imperial court. In the Great Zhou, the most powerful force was not the demonic path, nor the 6 schools and 4 great sects. It was the imperial court. Sure enough, as Li Mu expected, after only an hour, someone landed on Baiyun Peak. Li Mu opened the courtyard door and saw an elder standing outside. Li Mu knew that this person's surname was Su. He was an elder of the main peak. Elder Su smiled and asked, "Lord Li, are you used to living here?" Li Mu nodded and said, "The scenery here is pleasant and quiet. It is a good place for cultivation." Elder Su smiled and said, "That's good. If Lord Li has any requests, you can tell me. I will arrange it for you as soon as possible." The talisman puppet sect elder's attitude towards him seemed to be better than before. A trace of suspicion surfaced in Li Mu's heart as he asked, "Elder Su, is there anything important that you're here for?" Elder Su smiled again and said, "I am here on the orders of the headmaster to thank Lord Li for helping to repair the Dao Bell." Li Mu said, "It is my duty. The Dao Bell was damaged because of me. I will do my best to restore it to its original state." Elder Su shook his head and said, "Lord Li did not mean to damage the Dao Bell, but you did mean to repair it. Whether you can repair it or not, the Fulu school owes you a favor." Elder Su's attitude surprised Li Mu. If the Fulu school's attitude towards him before was polite, then this time it was warm. Not only that, he did not ask about anything else. The reason Li Mu had prepared was useless. Before Elder Su left, he had actually left behind some gifts. There were some spiritual jades of good quality, some alchemical pills that could recover one's magic power, and also talismans that could gather spiritual qi. When Li Mu and the Empress were chatting that night, they brought up this matter. The Empress was silent for a moment and then asked, "Could it be that the talisman sect is trying to rope you in?" Li Mu said, "Your Majesty, don't worry. I am loyal to your Majesty. I only have your Majesty in my heart. I will not join the Fulu school." Zhou did not seem to be worried about this. He only asked, "Then when will you be back?" Li Mu had 3 months of leave. He had only been away for half a month. Lu Hanyin still had not come out of seclusion. He would need at least 2 months before he could return. But the Empress's tone made Li Mu feel like he was a little wife who did not plan to return home after returning to her mother's home. He could not say that he would return in 2 months. He could only say, "I will be back as soon as possible." Chapter 326. Although Li Mu told the Empress that he would do it as soon as possible, it was definitely not that soon. He did not know when Lu Hanyin would come out of seclusion. After she came out, Li Mu would have to accompany her for at least a month. He would also have to persuade her to come back to Fairy's capital with him as soon as possible. This would probably delay them for a while. Besides, Li Mu also had the heavy responsibility of repairing the Dao Bell. He was the one who cracked the Dao Bell. If he did not take responsibility for it, then what was the difference between him and those scumbags who ran away after cheating a girl's first time? Repairing the Dao Bell was a time-consuming and laborious task. For example, the demon-slaying protective spell, the Tao Te Ching, the 9 syllables mantra, and the like were all very powerful. The first time they were used, they would produce even more origin power. If the Dao Bell did not try to pry into it and only absorb the origin power, it would not only be harmless but also beneficial. Unfortunately, although it was difficult to produce origin power, it was easy to dissipate it. When Li Mu first used it, the Dao Bell was not by Li Mu's side. The origin power had long dissipated. Li Mu could use some small spells and accumulate them. After a few days, the crack on the Dao Bell had only healed by 10 to 20%. If he wanted it to be completely repaired, 2 months would not be enough. Moreover, the spells that he had risked his life to experiment with were almost used up. He still had to spend time trying. Before leaving Mount Baiyun, he could only try his best to help it. After a few more days, Li Mu and the Dao Bell were finally familiar with each other. Its initial fear of Li Mu had long disappeared. Every morning after its morning class, it would fly to his place and only return at night. In addition to helping him repair the cracks, Li Mu had also done some experiments on it in the past few days. The Dao Bell was very hard. Even if Li Mu used the Qingshen sword to cut it, it would not leave any mark. Not only was it difficult to be hurt by swords, but it was also immune to spells. At least all the spells that Li Mu, who was in the transcendent realm, could cast could not shake it at all. It was impervious to lightning, impervious to fire and water, and even if tens of thousands of swords were launched simultaneously, it would not even tremble in the slightest. No wonder the Empress had said that it was the strongest defensive treasure known to the cultivation world. With this treasure, he would be in an invincible position no matter who he fought. Even if the other party was in the transcendent realm, Li Mu wouldn't be able to harm him, and he wouldn't be able to break through the defense of the Dao Bell. Of course, Li Mu had never fought against a transcendent powerhouse before. If he really did encounter such a powerhouse, even if the other party couldn't break the Dao Bell, they could still trap him inside. However, the prerequisite for all of this was that Li Mu had the treasure. But that was impossible. For thousands of years, the Law Bell had been the treasure of Fulu School. No matter who tried to steal it, the Fulu School would fight them to the death. After thinking this through, Li Mu no longer harbored any thoughts about the bell. In an uninhabited valley somewhere in Baiyin Mountain, Li Mu whistled, and the Dao bell in the distance flew back. From the size of a palm, it immediately grew to a huge bell that was about 10 feet tall, enveloping Li Mu within it. Then, the body of the bell immediately turned transparent. Li Mu, who was within the bell, could also see the situation outside. He formed a seal with his hands. Suddenly there was a violent wind, lightning, rain and snow outside. Through his experiments over the past few days, Li Mu discovered that while he was within the Dao bell, others couldn't attack him. However, it didn't affect him from using spells to attack others. Not only that, Li Mu took out a fulu. After throwing it out, the fulu actually passed through the transparent bell. This meant that the defense of the bell was one-way controllable. It could block attacks from outside the bell, but it had almost no effect on the person within the bell. No wonder the Fulu school treated it as the treasure of the sect. The ability of this bell was indeed worthy of this title. Li Mu sighed. The more he understood about the Dao bell, the stronger his desire to own it. However, he also knew that this was someone else's possession. He couldn't take it, nor could he. Li Mu whistled again. The Dao bell flew away from his head and turned back to the size of a palm. It floated on Li Mu's shoulder and spun non-stop. Li Mu tilted his head and glanced at it. You go back first. I'll walk around alone. The Dao bell buzzed for a while before reluctantly flying away. During the days when Lu Hanyan was in seclusion, Li Mu was actually quite bored on Mount Baiyun. Wanwan and Xiao Bai were obedient to Li Mu. The Dao bell was as obedient as Li Mu's dog. At this time, Li Mu vaguely understood the loneliness of the Empress. In life, one needed friends and enemies. If one's life was as calm as a pool of stagnant water, then the same day would just be repeating itself. This was the loneliness of cultivation. In the past, Li Mu's 7 spirits weren't complete. When his life was threatened, he could still endure the loneliness. Now, if he were to cultivate in seclusion for several months, he might not be able to sit still. Compared to the boring cultivation, he preferred to fight with the officials of the old and new parties in Luoyang. He wanted to help the people uphold justice and redress grievances. This way he could obtain their psychokinesis. This was not boring, and it was also faster than cultivating in seclusion. This could also be considered a shortcut to cultivation, but very few cultivators chose to do so. This time, Li Mu hadn't seen Hanja before coming to Mount Baiyun. This place was not far from the 5th peak. Li Mu flew to the 5th peak and asked the disciple guarding the peak to report. Soon Hanja came with the wind. Before he arrived, his voice came first. He said to Li Mu from afar, "I heard that you came to Ancestral Court. I was worried that I would disturb you and Lu, Martial Uncle Lu, so I didn't look for you." Li Mu said, "After I came to Mount Baiyun, Hanyan has been in seclusion." Hanja looked at him and said, "Then why didn't you come and drink with me?" Li Mu smiled and said, "Let's go to Mount Baiyun for a drink?" When Lu Hanyan was here, the difference in status between the two made Hanja embarrassed to appear in front of her. After all, although she was Li Mu's woman, she was also his martial uncle. Hearing that Lu Hanyan was not here, Hanja said straightforwardly, "Let's go." Wait for me, wait for me." A figure flew from behind. Junior sister Qin landed beside the two and said, "Bring me along." Hanja looked at her and asked, "Why didn't you cultivate properly? What are you doing here?" Junior sister Qin glanced at him and said, "I want to go too." Hanja shook his head and said, "I'm going to drink with my friends. Why are you joining in the fun?" Junior sister Qin said unhappily, "Are you the only one who is Big Brother Li's friend? I'm also his friend. We've already met 3 times. Big Brother Li, don't you think I'm your friend?" Looking at Junior sister Qin's somewhat pleading eyes, Li Mu nodded and said, "Yes. Since Junior sister Qin wants to go, let's go together." Hanja did not stop her. He just sighed and said, "If you slack off like this, when can you reach the spirit realm? Senior brother Qin asked me to take care of you. Fortunately, you're a girl." Junior sister Qin was stunned for a moment. Then she asked with a red face, "What's wrong with being a girl?" Hanja looked at her and said, "You're so disobedient. If you weren't a girl, I would have already beaten you." Junior sister Qin's face turned from red to white and then to green. She turned her head away in a fit of pique. Li Mu shook his head and said, "Let's go." On Baiyun Peak. In the small building on the peak, Wanwan and Xiao Bai were busy preparing dishes in the kitchen. Junior sister Qin was observing and learning from the side. Li Mu and Hanja sat at the stone table in the courtyard. Hanja asked, "How have you been in Shindu recently?" Li Mu said, "Not bad." Hanja said, "I heard that the officials and nobles in Shin do are different from the disciples and elders of our sect. They're very shrewd and scheming against each other. If you're not careful, you'll die without a burial place. You have to be careful there. Li Mu said, It's okay. Actually, most of them are quite simple-minded. He took out a pot of wine from the flask space and poured a cup for Hanja. He said, Try it. Hanja took a sip. He felt that the wine was mellow and full of spiritual qi. One sip was equivalent to a day of his cultivation. He could not help but ask in surprise, What wine is this? Li Mu said, The tribute wine from Hanyang County. It's not bad, right? Hanja clicked his tongue and said, You can even drink the tribute wine. Looks like you're doing well in Chengdu. The tribute wine was given by the Empress. Li Mu's house was filled with gifts from the Empress. Although he had not been to many places, he was very familiar with the specialties of the 36 counties. The tribute wine from Hanyang County was the best. The tribute pear skin from Jianghu County was thin and juicy. The tea leaves from South County were sweet and refreshing. The silk from East County was sold well in many countries. Ever since that incident, in order to make up for the harm she had done to Li Mu, the Empress had been bestowing him with gifts every 2 to 3 days. Although the house was big, it was a bit full now. Last time, she had said that she wanted to bestow Li Mu with a bigger house, but he had rejected her. The Empress had treated him even better. A house with 5 entrances could only be lived in by officials of the 4th rank or higher. If he changed to a bigger house, it was inevitable that there would be some rumors in the court. They would say that Li Mu had used his face to charm the Empress. Of all the court officials in the court, he was the only one she favored. Of course, after the imperial examination, Li Mu had used facts to slap those people in the face. He also told them that he was able to gain the Empress' favor not just because of his face. Even if the Empress wanted to reward him with a bigger house, it was in exchange for his identity as the top scholar in both the civil and military examinations. However, he and Xiaobai were already used to living in that house. There was no need to torment it. The wine was sweet but not intoxicating. This was also the reason why Li Mu was not worried about letting Hanja drink it. Hanja drank a few cups and suddenly thought of something. He looked at Li Mu and said, That's right. 2 months ago, junior sister Li returned to the mountain gate once. Li Mu raised his wine cup and slowly put it down. He asked, Is she still at Mount Baiyun? Hanja shook his head and said, She left. She won't be coming back in the future. Li Mu was stunned and asked, What do you mean? Hanja looked at him and explained, She has already left the Fulu school. From now on, she is no longer a disciple of the Fulu school. This news caught Li Mu off guard. He stared at Hanja and asked, Why? Hanja took another sip of wine and said, I don't know the exact details. I only heard it from the disciples of the 7th peak. The Fulu school has never forced non-core disciples to stay or leave. I originally wanted to ask junior sister Li why she left, but by the time I found out about this, she had already left the sect. Chapter 327. Last time, when he had parted ways with Li Qing, Li Mu had felt that she seemed to have something on her mind. After learning that she had left the Fulu school, Li Mu was even more certain of this thought. Although the Fulu school had 7 peaks and 7 branches of disciples, from a certain perspective, there were only 2 kinds of disciples in the Fulu school: core disciples and non-core disciples. Core disciples were disciples who had access to the core secrets of the Fulu school. These core secrets were either the Fulu techniques that were not taught to outsiders, or the Taoist techniques that were not taught to non-core disciples. These disciples could not casually leave the Fulu school. Even if they wanted to leave, their memories of the sect's secrets would be erased. Non-core disciples could not come into contact with these secrets. They only cultivated ordinary techniques, and the Fulu Taoist techniques that they studied were also made public. Unlike outsiders, they could obtain certain cultivation resources from the sect by completing sect missions. For example, in the past, Li Qing had worked as a constable in the Yangqiu County government for a year. When she returned to the sect, she could exchange for spiritual jades, transcendent artifacts and other items for cultivation. Non-core disciples could leave the sect, but very few people did so. After all, since ancient times, the Great Zhou had emphasized etiquette and respect for teachers. This was a tradition engraved in the bones of every person in the Great Zhou. For cultivators, the sect was their home. Almost every cultivator had a strong sense of belonging to their own sect. For a cultivator to leave the sect, it was no different from a mortal severing their relationship with their parents. In the eyes of some extreme people, leaving the sect for no reason was no different from apostasy. Li Mu understood Li Qing very well. She was a person who valued relationships and righteousness. She would not abandon a subordinate that had nothing to do with her. How could she suddenly leave the sect that she had lived in for 10 years? Thinking of how Li Qing seemed to have some hidden troubles before they parted ways, Li Mu was certain that she had left the sect for some reason. When he thought of this, he could not sit still. He was eager to find out why Li Qing was so good at Fulu school. When Li Mu stood up and turned to leave, Hanja asked in surprise, "Where are you going?" Li Mu didn't even turn his head and said, "I have something to do, so I have to go out. Let junior sister Qin accompany you for a few drinks." Hanja looked at junior sister Qin, who was walking towards him, and shook his head. "Junior sister Qin, how many cups can you drink?" A moment later, junior sister Qin carried the drunk Hanja on her back. She turned around and waved at Wanwan and Xiaobai, saying, "When Brother Li comes back, tell him that we're going back first." Xiaobai sat at the stone table in the courtyard, resting her chin on one hand. She looked in the direction of the main peak and muttered, "Where did our benefactor go? Who is junior sister Li? Shu?" Wanwan made a shushing gesture and said, "Don't mention this name in the future, especially in front of Mississippi. Don't mention it even once." White Cloud Mountain, main peak. After Li Mu arrived at the main peak, the Dao Bell sensed him and flew over happily. Li Mu patted it and said, "I'm here to find Elder Su. Help me call him." The Dao Bell flew away with a whoosh, and soon flew back. There was still a person inside the bell. Li Mu rubbed his forehead. The Dao Bell didn't seem to understand what call meant. Elder Su was thrown out of the Dao Bell and staggered. When he finally steadied himself, he saw Li Mu in front of him. The Dao Bell shrank and flew to Li Mu's shoulder. It buzzed non-stop as if it was asking for credit. Li Mu looked at Elder Su and said apologetically, "Elder Su, I'm really sorry. I only asked the Dao Bell to inform you. It seems to have misunderstood my intentions." Elder Su was originally drawing a talisman. He was halfway through when the Dao Bell rushed in and swept him away. He was a bit distressed about the talisman materials, but he didn't dare to be angry with the Dao Bell. This ancestor had a strange temperament and was temperamental. If he angered it and made it run away, he wouldn't be able to atone for his sins. Of course, he couldn't blame Li Mu. As an honored guest of the Fulu school and the only hope to speed up the restoration of the Dao Bell, he had to be polite to Li Mu. "It's fine." He smiled at Li Mu and asked, "Lord Li, why are you looking for me?" Li Mu said, "I have a friend who used to be a disciple of the Purple Cloud Peak. For some reason she left the Fulu school. I want to go to the Purple Cloud Peak to find out more about her, but I don't know many people there. I can only trouble Elder Su." "I see." Elder Su smiled and said, "This is a small matter. I'll go to the Purple Cloud Peak with Lord Li." The Purple Cloud Peak was the 7th peak of the Fulu school. The head of the peak was Yu Quanzi. Li Mu had actually met Yu Quanzi once. When Yu Zhenzi brought Lu Hanyin to extort the peak heads, Li Mu was also present. The heaven-grade armor he was wearing now was given to him by Yu Quanzi. To be precise, Yu Zhenzi had extorted it from him. The two of them flew on a cloud and arrived at the 7th peak in the blink of an eye. When the disciple guarding the peak saw the two of them, he immediately walked forward and bowed to Elder Su. "Greetings, Elder Su." Elder Su asked, "Is Elder Sun here?" A disciple guarding the peak nodded and said, "Elder Sun is on the peak. This disciple will go and report to him." Elder Sun was also an old man. Li Mu had stayed in White Cloud Peak for a long time and found that the fortune elders of the various peaks were mostly old men or old women. On the other hand, the officials of the imperial court who were at the 5th level of cultivation were mostly middle-aged. He did not know whether it was because the imperial court controlled the 36 counties and had more abundant cultivation resources, making it easier for them to create experts, or because the strength of the Fulu school was all roaming outside and not in the sect. After Elder Sun walked out of the Purple Cloud Peak Taoist Palace, Elder Su looked at him and said, "This is Lord Li, an honored guest of our Fulu school. He has a friend who used to be on the 7th peak. He came to the Purple Cloud Peak to ask about the situation of that disciple." Elder Sun smiled and said, "Since you are an honored guest of our sect, let's go in and talk." After entering the Taoist Palace on the left, Elder Su introduced to Li Mu, "In the Purple Cloud Peak, Elder Sun is responsible for the admission and departure of disciples. If Lord Li has any questions you can ask Elder Sunday." Li Mu nodded and looked at Elder Sunday. He asked, "Elder Sun, do you know Li Qing?" "Li Qing?" Elder Sun was startled at first, Then a look of pity appeared on his face. He said, "What a pity, what a pity." She was originally one of the most outstanding disciples of the Purple Cloud Peak. After the grand competition of the peaks, she would have definitely become a core disciple. Unfortunately, she left the sect before the competition. This is a loss to the Purple Cloud Peak. Li Mu continued asking, "Elder Son, do you know why she left the sect?" Elder Son shook his head and said, "She didn't say the reason. I tried my best to persuade her that if she had any difficulties she could tell the sect. However, she was determined to leave, so I didn't try to persuade her anymore. The sect has never restricted the departure of disciples." After coming to the Purple Cloud Peak, Li Mu's heart was not at ease. Instead, it was hanging by a thread. Based on his understanding of Li Qing, she would definitely not leave the sect that had nurtured her for 10 years for no reason. Previously, when the two of them were on a mission together, Li Mu could clearly feel that she had a strong sense of belonging to the Fulu school. In her heart, leaving the sect was tantamount to betrayal. What had happened to her that she did not hesitate to leave the sect and cut ties with the Fulu school? Li Mu suddenly remembered the way Li Qing looked at him when he parted ways with her. At that time, her eyes were filled with confusion and conflict, but in the end she still chose to leave. It was as if she was cutting ties with Li Mu. If she had encountered something and wanted to cut ties with Li Mu could understand. Based on her personality, she would never let her own matters implicate Li Mu. But her choice to leave the Fulu school made Li Mu feel a lingering fear. He understood Li Qing very well. There were only two possibilities for her to make such a decision. First, what she was about to do might damage the reputation of the Fulu school. As a disciple of the Fulu school, she had a strong sense of belonging to the sect. She did not wish to damage the reputation of the Fulu school because of what she was about to do. Second, what she was about to do might make things difficult for the Fulu school, or even implicate the Fulu school. Li Mu was worried about the second point. The Fulu school was one of the 6 great Taoist sects. The ancestral court had a strong appeal to the various branches of the Fulu school. If she could become a core disciple, the Fulu school would become her backing. But in a situation where the status of a core disciple was so easy to obtain, she still chose to leave. This meant that in her heart, the Fulu school could not protect her. Li Mu did not dare to think about it any further. He asked Taoist priest Sun Chang, "Can I take a look at the file Li Qing entered the sect?" Elder Sun looked troubled. Although the files of the various peaks disciples were not top secret, they were not something that an outsider could look at just because they wanted to. Elder Su said, "The sect master said that Lord Li is an honored guest of our sect. We must do our best to satisfy his requests." Since it was the sect master's order, Elder Sun no longer hesitated. "Please follow me." The three of them arrived at a small room in the Taoist palace. A wooden shelf was placed on one wall of the room. The shelf was filled with jade slips. Elder Sun thought for a moment, then said, "From what I remember, Li Qing came to the Fulu school 11 years ago. She was only 9 years old at that time. I found the file of the disciples from 11 years ago. It's here." He took a jade slip from the shelf. After injecting a strand of transcendence energy, the jade slip projected a ray of light, condensing into several lines of words in the air. Song Ming, 12 years old, male, from North Commandery County, Song Village, 2 parents, younger sister, almost 5 years old. Pei Chuan, 10 years old, male, from North Commandery Zhou County, Pei Clan, parents dead. Su Ren, 16 years old, male, from Yunzhong Commandery. The jade slip projected the information of the disciples that the Fulu school had recruited back then. The Fulu school did not recruit many disciples each year, and even fewer disciples were assigned to each sect. This year, Violet Cloud Peak had recruited a total of 10 disciples. The information in the jade slip was extremely detailed, recording each disciple's age, gender, place of origin, and family situation. Li Mu's gaze swept across, and finally at the end he saw a familiar name: Li Qing. Li Mu's gaze continued to move down, and his expression froze. Under her name there were no other words. Other than her name, where she came from, and who else was in her family, there was nothing. Elder Su also noticed the abnormality. Looking at Elder Sun, he asked, "What's going on?" Elder Sun scratched his head, also somewhat puzzled. Logically speaking, such a situation should not have occurred, unless she did not enter the sect through the normal method. As for the specific method, I'm afraid only the elder who guided her into the sect back then would know. There was no record in Li Qing's file. Elder Sun asked the other elders, but none of them knew. In the past 10 years, the positions of the elders of the various peaks had changed, and some had even died due to unknown reasons. To find the elder who guided Li Qing into the sect back then would probably require the full power of the Fulu school. This trip could be considered a fruitless one. As they flew out of Violet Cloud Peak, Elder Su said to Li Mu, "Lord Li, don't worry. I will help you keep an eye on this matter. If there is any news, I will inform you immediately." Li Mu clasped his hands together and said, "Thank you, Elder Su." Elder Su smiled and said, "It's no trouble at all." Li Mu's gaze inadvertently looked down, and he saw that the mountain path below was densely packed with people. Waves of mana could be faintly felt, and he asked curiously, "Why are there so many cultivators down there?" Elder Su explained, "In 5 days, it will be the Talisman Dao trial that is held once every 4 years. During each trial, the various peaks will choose a few seedlings who are adept at the Talisman Dao from these cultivators and accept them as disciples. For a large sect like the Fulu school, the legacy of the sect was extremely important." Li Mu had seen this before. They sent people to the various government offices and through the household register. They found various talents with special constitutions. After accepting them as disciples, they nurtured them from a young age. Compared to that method, accepting disciples through the trial was obviously less costly and more effective. The 6 schools and 4 sects were the blessed lands in the hearts of all cultivators. Joining these sects meant that one could use the resources of the sect and receive the guidance of the sect's experts. Therefore, cultivators flocked to these sections. At this moment, Li Mu saw no less than 100 people below. Elder Su looked down and said with some pride, "Thousands of people participate in each trial of our sect. The final winner will receive a talisman. With this talisman, one can directly become a core disciple of our sect." As he spoke, he suddenly slapped his head and said, "I remember now. No wonder the name Li Qing sounds familiar to me. 11 years ago, someone used a talisman to exchange for her opportunity to enter the sect. I was the one who personally handled it." Li Mu raised his eyebrows and asked, "The talisman can be used by others?" Elder Su nodded and said, "It can. However, if the talisman is not used by the trial champion, but is only given to someone else, then the person who enters the sect through the talisman can only be an ordinary disciple." Li Mu thought for a moment and asked, "Can I participate in the Fulu trial?" Elder Su was stunned for a moment and nodded. "You can. As long as you are a cultivator under the age of 30, you can participate in the trial." He sized up Li Mu and asked, "But does Lord Li know anything about Fulu?" Li Mu nodded and said, "I know a little." Chapter 328. Elder Su looked at Li Mu. Seeing that he was serious, he could only say, "If Lord Li wants to try, I will arrange it for you after I return to the main peak." There was something he did not say out loud for the sake of his face. If he only had a slight understanding of the Fulu Dao, he might not even be able to pass the first stage of the trial. Every 4 years, the ancestral court held a trial of the Tao of Talismans. This trial also had the purpose of selecting the best disciples. During each trial, there would be thousands or even tens of thousands of cultivators coming from all over the Great Zhou and even other countries. These cultivators all wanted to join the Fulu school and become a disciple of a large sect. They wanted to embark on a broader path of cultivation. The people who participated in the trial traveled a long way. Every one of them had some confidence in their Fulu Dao. Even so, less than 1 out of 100 people could pass the trial in the end. Those who could last until the end were all true masters of the Fulu Dao. Every path of cultivation was very difficult. A cultivator could only be proficient in one path. A cultivator who was proficient in the Fulu Dao would find it difficult to invest a lot of time in divine arts, alchemy, artifact forging, formation, and martial Dao. They would not have deep attainments in these areas. In Elder Su's eyes, Li Mu's attainments in divine arts had clearly reached the peak. He was among the top geniuses. If such a person was also proficient in the Fulu Dao, the heavens would be too unfair. He originally wanted to remind Li Mu that if he only had a slight understanding of the Fulu Dao, there was no need for him to participate in the trial of the Dao of Talismans. After thinking about it, he felt that this would hurt his pride too much. It would be better to let him hit a wall once. He would know how much he was worth in the Fulu Dao. After parting with Elder Su, Li Mu flew towards White Cloud Peak. This trip to Purple Cloud Peak was not without any gains. He found out through Elder Sun's investigation that Li Qing had entered the Fulu school 11 years ago and had entered the sect through special channels. Someone had wasted the opportunity to become a core disciple of the Fulu school and used a talisman to send her into the Fulu school. Originally, the jade slip should have recorded the information of the disciples who had entered the sect in detail. Why did it only have her name? What was her identity? What was she carrying? Why did she suddenly leave Fulu school? Li Mu's heart was filled with one mystery after another. He had no way of knowing all these, but he could confirm that Li Qing must have met with something, and it must be something grave, something that could endanger her life. Li Mu's heart was burning with anxiety, but he had nowhere to go and was powerless to do anything. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something, and a ray of light appeared in his mind. Just now, he was so worried that he actually forgot an important point. As long as he could find the original owner of that talisman, wouldn't he be able to figure out what had happened to Li Qing? The Tao of Talismans trial was only held once every 4 years, and the person that obtained the first every year would surely be the center of attention. It was difficult to find Li Qing, but wasn't it easy to find him? Li Mu flew back to the main peak. This time he did not ask Dao Zhong to invite Elder Su, but paid a visit in person. After only a quarter of an hour he saw Li Mu again. Elder Su asked in surprise, "Lord Li, is there anything else?" Li Mu went straight to the point and asked, "Elder Su must have an impression of the first person in each Tao of Talismans trial, right?" "Of course." Taoist priest Su Chang said, 4 years ago the first person in the Tao of Talismans trial is now a core disciple of the main peak. 2 years ago he stepped into Dongxian. 8 years ago, the first person in the Tao of Talismans trial did not stay in the ancestral court, but he established a branch of the Fulu school. 12 years ago, that person from 12 years ago, used his talisman in exchange for Li Qing's opportunity to enter the sect. Li Mu hurriedly asked, "Who was that person from 12 years ago?" Elder Su shook his head and said, "Because he didn't stay in the ancestral court, nor did he join the Fulu school. I don't remember his information." "Lord Li, please wait a moment, I'll check for you." He walked out of the Taoist palace and after a while he came back and said, "I've found it. That person's name is Li Er. 12 years ago he only left this name. Li Er Li Qing. Could Li Qing be his daughter? However, the name Li Er should be just a pseudonym. No one would have such a strange name." Li Mu said seriously, "This matter is very important to me. I want to know the ins and outs of what happened back then. I'll have to trouble Elder Su." Elder Su had never seen Li Mu so serious. After thinking for a while he said, "I'll check who was in charge of the Talisman Dao trial back then. You should know more than me." He walked into the Taoist palace and came out a moment later. He took out a Fulu, transmitted a few words to the Fulu, and threw the Fulu into the air. The talisman turned into a paper crane and flew out of the Taoist palace. Not long after, an old woman flew in from the outside. After the old woman came in, she asked directly, "Senior Brother Su, why are you looking for me?" Elder Su looked at the old woman and asked, "Junior Sister Qin, I remember that you were in charge of the Talisman Dao trial 12 years ago. Do you still remember the first place of the trial?" The old woman was stunned and said, "Why do you suddenly ask this?" Taoist priest Su Chang said, "Don't ask this first. Do you still remember that person?" The old woman said, "Of course. That person is called Li Er. I remember that 13 years ago he wanted to send a little girl to our Fulu school. However, that little girl's aptitude was not outstanding, so we didn't agree at that time." Elder Su said in surprise, "There's such a thing?" The old woman nodded and said, "Later, he asked me what would make the ancestral court willing to accept that little girl. I told him that as long as the little girl could enter the top 30 in the Talisman Dao trial, or if he could win the Talisman Dao trial, she could enter the ancestral court." Elder Su asked, "What happened after that?" The old woman continued, "That little girl didn't cultivate and didn't even have the qualifications to participate in the Talisman Dao trial. However, Li Er left without saying a word after hearing it. Half a year later he actually came to participate in the trial and passed several stages in a row. He took the first place in one fell swoop and used that talisman to exchange for the little girl's chance to enter the ancestral court. I remember that she went to the Violet Cloud Peak later. After 12 years, when she talked about Li Er, her face was still full of admiration. She said, 'That person really has great perseverance. Half a year ago he didn't know the Tao of Fulu at all, but he still borrowed a talisman book from me. I pitied him, so I passed on some of my knowledge of talisman books to him. Who knew that half a year later, his attainments in the Talisman Dao would advance by leaps and bounds? He was actually not inferior to the elders who had been immersed in the Talisman Dao for many years. He suppressed thousands of Talisman Dao experts and won the first place in the trial in one fell swoop. In fact, at that time, The sect master specially allowed him to become a core disciple of the ancestral court in addition to that little girl, but he refused. The old woman sighed and said, 12 years ago, if he was willing to stay in the Fulu school with his perseverance and talent, I'm afraid our sect would have another head elder. What a pity, Li Mu asked hopefully. Senior, do you know where Li Er went? The old woman shook her head and said, since the little girl was sent to the Fulu school 11 years ago, he has never appeared again. Li Mu didn't give up and continued to ask, what does Li Er look like? The old woman waved her hand and a picture appeared in front of Li Mu. The man in the picture was wearing a gray robe and a bamboo hat on his head. A black cloth hung down the edge of the bamboo hat, completely covering his appearance. Li Mu sighed. The only remaining clue of the Fulu school was broken just like that. When he returned to White Cloud Peak, Hanjie and junior sister Qin had already left. Before Li Mu left, he changed his wine. With Hanjie's alcohol tolerance, he would get drunk after a few cups. He didn't know if junior sister Qin would be able to seize the opportunity. Li Mu wasn't in the mood to worry about Hanjie. He was only thinking about Li Qing. A year ago, when Li Mu was by her side, he was only a small bailiff and couldn't help her much. Now he already had the ability to protect her, but he couldn't find her. Fate often played with people like this. When she made the decision to leave the Fulu school, she must have been in a lot of pain. Therefore, Li Mu was determined to obtain the talisman tablet for the talisman Dao trial this time. This matter was outside of his original plan. Li Mu thought about it and decided to inform the Empress. Li Mu took out the conch. After activating it with his magic power, he asked softly, Your Majesty, are you busy? Soon the Empress's voice came from the conch. Are you coming back? Li Mu coughed softly and said awkwardly, No, I might have to wait for a few more days to return to the divine capital. In a few days, it will be the Fulu school's talisman Dao trial. I plan to participate in this trial? Talisman Dao trial? Within the conch, the Empress's voice paused and then she asked, Isn't the talisman Dao trial set up by the talisman sect for the sake of selecting disciples? You promised me that you wouldn't join the talisman sect. Li Mu quickly explained, It's not like what your Majesty thinks. Your Majesty, please listen to my explanation. Li Mu felt strange talking to the Empress like this. It was as if their identities were reversed. Then he realized that this was the identity he should have. He could finally talk to the Empress with this normal identity. The Empress was silent for a moment and said, You can explain. Li Mu thought for a moment and said, I think that the Great Zhou is now troubled by both internal and external problems. The new party, the old party, and the academy are not on the same side as your Majesty. The only inner guard who is loyal to your Majesty is too weak. There seem to be many officials in the court, but your Majesty is the only one who is struggling. If the Fulu school can support your Majesty, you won't have to work so hard. In the Chang'e Palace, Zhou Yi felt a trace of warmth in her heart. Even her gaze softened. She said softly, These sects have always been detached from the world. No matter the rise or fall of the dynasty, they can't interfere with the court. Li Mu said, I can first become a disciple of the Fulu school and then cultivate slowly. If I have a chance to enter the sixth realm, I can become a peak chief and have a certain say in the Fulu school. If I have a chance to enter the seventh realm, I have a chance to become the headmaster of the Fulu school. At that time, I and the entire Fulu school will be your Majesty's solid backing. Outside the small building, Elder Su was holding a trial letter and had one foot in the yard. When he heard Li Mu's words, embarrassment appeared on his face. He didn't know whether to enter or leave. Li Mu also noticed the abnormality behind him. When he turned around and met Elder Su's eyes, his expression gradually became awkward. Chapter 329. Li Mu looked at Elder Su and Elder Su also looked at him. The situation was very awkward. In the end, it was Elder Su who broke the awkwardness. He coughed lightly and walked into the courtyard. He said, I have brought Lord Li's trial letter. Since he did not mention what happened just now, Li Mu naturally would not mention it either. He accepted the trial letter and said, Thank you, Elder Su. Taoist priest Su Chang said, In 5 days when the trial begins, I will inform Lord Li again. Li Mu nodded and said, Okay. Elder Su cupped his hands and said, I will take my leave first. Li Mu cupped his hands and returned the greeting. Take care, Elder Su. After a polite exchange, Elder Su turned and left. In the spiritual snail, the Empress thought for a while and said, Why don't you capture him and I will teach you how to erase his memory? Li Mu hurriedly said, No need, no need. Li Mu represented the empress in the cooperation with the Fulu school. He could sit down and talk with the Fulu school's headmaster. There was no need to erase Elder Su's memory. Moreover, no one would believe him if he said that he wanted to become the headmaster of the Fulu school with just a little theurgy. In fact, Elder Su, who walked out of the small hut, really scoffed at Li Mu's words just now. To become the headmaster of the Fulu school, he first had to become a core disciple of the Fulu school. Just this alone was enough to completely block him out. The fastest way to become a core disciple of the Fulu school was to participate in the trial of the Tao of Talismans. He had to defeat thousands of cultivators who were proficient in the Tao of Talismans and win first place in the trial. This was only the first step of his plan. The second step was to cultivate hard and break through to the creation realm. Only then could he become an elder. The third step was to break through to the Dongxian realm from the creation realm. Only then could he become the headmaster. It was easy to go from divine ability to creation. At most, it would take a few decades. Once the magic power was enough, success would follow naturally. However, when the creation realm came to Dongxian, what was tested was one's talent and comprehension. The Fulu school had more than 100 creation elders, but only a few first seats. As for the fourth step, becoming the sect master, he still had to break through to the seventh realm and wait for the current sect master to abdicate before he could succeed the position of sect master. Even if there was such a day, it would be decades or centuries later. By then, the Great Zhou might have had several emperors. Elder Su just smiled lightly before tossing this matter to the back of his mind, and then he flew towards the main peak. The Tao of Talismans trial this time was presided over by him, and he still had many things to do. Inside the small building, the Empress was silent for a while, then said, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you just now. Although Li Mu was disappointed by the Empress's lack of trust, he did not show it. He said, It is okay. I can understand, Your Majesty. As a man, he should be more magnanimous. If he was petty and got angry with the Empress, wouldn't he be like some unreasonable woman? Li Mu tried not to let himself be in the position of a barbaric boyfriend. He was already so magnanimous. He wouldn't have those strange dreams of lying in the Empress's arms at night, right? The next morning, Li Mu sat up from the bed with an expression of doubt on his face. Last night he was not in the Empress's arms. But the Empress was in his arms. These days, the number of times he dreamed of the Empress was more than the number of times he dreamed of Lu Hanyan. It must be because they talked too often. Li Si said that between men and women, only by maintaining a distance could there be pure friendship. Once the contact became frequent or the distance between them became close, the pure feelings would often become no longer pure. Li Mu decided to reduce the frequency of contact with the Empress, from once a day to once every 2 days. Now that he was far away in the North County, the Empress could not see him. When he returned to Shindu, if he had such strange dreams again and was caught by the Empress, Li Mu could not even imagine the consequences. There were still a few days before the trial. He borrowed a few talisman books from Elder Su and prepared to make a breakthrough. Although Li Mu had already thoroughly grasped nearly 100 types of basic talismans in the past half a month, among the thousands of cultivators that had participated in the trial, besides a small portion that had come to make up the numbers and gain experience, all of them had absolute confidence in their own Tao of Talismans, so Li Mu had no choice but to treat his opponent as a human. 5 days later, on Mount Baiyun, the Talisman Tao trial that was held once every 4 years was about to begin. The Talisman Tao trial was not only a big deal for Mount Baiyun, but also for the entire North County and the surrounding counties. Before and after the Talisman Tao trial, thousands of cultivators gathered near Mount Baiyun. The demons around the North County had to stay in their nests obediently to avoid unexpected disasters. During this period, even demons and ghosts who had not done anything evil could be killed by the cultivators. The Fulu School's Talisman Tao trial was even crueler than the Great Zhou Court's imperial examinations. The imperial examinations selected 100 out of thousands of people. The Talisman Tao trial often had tens of thousands of participants, but in the end only less than 50 people could pass the trial. It was difficult to select 1 out of 100 people. Even so, there were still countless cultivators who took part in the trial. There was no other reason. He snorted coldly and strode into the cliff. Stepping on the white cloud, he safely walked to the other side. The young man's eyes widened. He wondered if the cliff really judged one's bone age. He tentatively took a step forward, and after letting out a scream, he fell straight down. These shrill cries caused some people to completely panic, and they didn't dare take another step forward. They turned back along the path they came from with dejection. Li Mu took a step forward and stepped on the white cloud. It was as if he had stepped on solid ground. He easily walked to the other side of the cliff. When he reached the other side, Li Mu realized that this was a huge platform. The platform covered an unknown amount of land. He could not see the end of it. It was as if someone had used great magic to flatten the entire mountain from the mountainside and carve out a platform. On the platform, there were countless stone platforms that were half the height of a person. On the stone platforms, there were writing brushes, yellow paper, cinnabar, and other items. Li Mu walked to the front and found a stone platform. He stood behind the stone platform. The cultivators who passed the cliff quickly found a stone platform and stood still. They were ready to take the first stage of the Talisman Dao trial. At first, there were more than 6,000 people who had a trial letter. Among them, there were only about 100 people who were over the age and wanted to take advantage of the situation. They had already been eliminated at the cliff. There were still nearly 6,000 people who participated in the first stage of the trial. After everyone who passed the cliff found a stone platform and stood still, 3 shining golden words suddenly appeared in the sky in front of the platform. Exorcism Talisman. There was no explanation for this stage. However, from the words in the sky and the items on the stone platforms, it was not difficult to guess that the first stage of the trial was for everyone to draw an exorcism talisman. The exorcism talisman was a yellow-grade fulu. It was also one of the most basic fulu. It had many uses. When ordinary people carried it on their bodies, low-level ghosts and monsters would not dare to come close. When the exorcism talisman was turned into talisman water and drank it, it could cure common colds and various diseases. Almost all cultivators who had learned fulu knew how to draw an exorcism talisman. For many people, this was the first fulu that they had learned. Fulu school was quite friendly to these cultivators. They did not make things difficult for them in the first stage. However, this did not mean that this stage was not difficult at all. There were only 3 sheets of yellow paper on the stone platform. The amount of cinnabar was only enough to draw 3 fulu. There was an incense stick on the stone platform. At a certain moment it lit itself. This meant that all the cultivators had to successfully draw an exorcism talisman within the time it took for an incense stick to burn. Moreover, they only had 3 chances. After failing 3 times, they would not have the materials to draw a talisman. Cultivators being able to draw a fulu and cultivators being able to draw a fulu in one try were 2 completely different concepts. Some people could draw an exorcism talisman, but they had to fail multiple times and waste many sets of materials before succeeding. Such a person could not be considered to have fulu talent. White Cloud Mountain. Main peak. There was a huge screen in the sky above the square. On the screen was the situation on the platform. The elders chatted and laughed as they watched the situation on the screen. How long do you think it will take for these people to successfully draw an exorcism talisman? Those who pass will be able to draw it in half an incense stick's time. After that, even if they can draw it, they will not be able to pass the subsequent trials. I remember that in the past trials, the fastest person to draw this talisman took 20 breaths. It was 12 years ago, right? I still remember that Lier. He was a true talisman Dao genius. 20 breaths. Many elders in the sect can't do it that fast. As the elders were discussing, a beam of light suddenly lit up on the screen. The square fell silent for a moment before an uproar broke out. Someone finished drawing so quickly? How many breaths have passed this time? Less than 10 breaths. That's way too fast. How is that possible? Could there be a 6th realm cultivator among the cultivators? Is that a senior joking? Everyone looked at the screen, which quickly zoomed in on a certain spot on the platform. The elders widened their eyes, wanting to see who could draw an exorcism talisman in such a short time. However, all they saw was a cloud of fog. Everyone could not help but be stunned. What's going on? Why is there fog on the trial platform? Who can go and see what's happening on the trial platform? Someone reacted quickly and said, "That's not fog on the trial platform. He has a Dharma treasure on him that conceals heavenly secrets." Elder Su stood up abruptly with a stunned expression. "It's him." If he couldn't draw an exorcism talisman before the incense burned out, he would be eliminated in the first stage of the trial. He looked at the man one last time and thought to himself, "I hope you can be as fast in bed." Dozens of breaths after Li Mu drew the exorcism talisman, a faint light began to shine from the trial platform. He looked around. A small number of people had already completed their exorcism talismans, but most of them were still immersed in drawing. Fulu School's first trial was quite interesting. What they tested was the most common Fulu, but the testing method was not ordinary. 1 incense stick and 3 talisman papers. Not only did it require the success rate of the talisman writing, it also required the speed of the talisman writing. For a cultivator who practiced the Tao of Fulu, the success rate of the talisman writing was extremely important. This point was not reflected in low-level Fulu. If the success rate was slightly lower, at most some yellow paper and cinnabar would be wasted. But for high-level Fulu, the talisman papers and talisman writing materials were extremely precious and could not be wasted. If one failed a few times, they might have to gather materials again. Li Mu stood behind the stone platform and waited until the last incense stick on the stone platform burned to ashes. Wait, I'm just short of 1. Give me another 10 breaths. Give me a chance. The cultivators who had not yet succeeded in drawing talismans all spoke out anxiously. But the stone platform beside them suddenly burst out with a burst of light and swept them away from the trial platform. The stone platform in front of the cultivators who passed the first stage emitted a faint light, and they continued to stay on the trial platform. Li Mu looked around again and found that after the first stage, the number of cultivators on the stone platform had decreased by nearly half. An ordinary exorcism talisman was also able to distinguish so many cultivators. After the bell rang, Elder Su's voice rang in everyone's ears. Those who can draw 10 exorcism talismans within an hour can enter the 3rd stage of the trial. As his voice fell, countless yellow papers and cinnabar flew in from outside the platform and landed on the remaining stone platforms. Li Mu counted the yellow papers on the stone platform in front of him. There were exactly 10 of them. This meant that if one wanted to pass the 2nd stage, he had to ensure a 100% success rate and complete it within an hour. If the difficulty of the first stage was 1, then the difficulty of the 2nd stage was 100. Within the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there were 3 chances to draw an exorcism talisman. If one had some attainments in the Tao of talismans, they could do it. But to ensure that one could draw 10 talismans without making a single mistake was not something a beginner in the Tao of talismans could do. If they were calm and slow, it would increase their success rate, but if they exceeded the time limit of 2 hours, they would still be eliminated. There were constantly cultivators making mistakes and being taken away by the stone platform. This made the remaining cultivators even more careful. They didn't dare to try to be fast and hoped that time would pass slowly. However, the bell for the 2nd stage of the trial still rang on time. Countless stone platforms emitted a burst of light, sweeping away the cultivators who didn't complete the trial on time. There were less than 1,000 cultivators left on the platform. In the 2nd stage of the trial, 2/3 of the cultivators who passed the previous stage were directly eliminated. In just 2 rounds, 5 out of 6 people were eliminated. The trial of the Fulu School was even crueler than the Imperial Court's imperial examinations. Li Mu didn't have to wait long before another golden light lit up the sky in front of him. Chapter 331. The 3rd round of the Talisman Tao trial had begun. Several golden runes appeared in the sky in front of the trial platform. These runes formed a Fulu. The moment he saw the rune, Li Mu had some doubts in his heart. Because he had never seen this Fulu before. Li Mu had already learned all the basic Fulu during his time at Fulu School. He was sure that this Fulu was not any type that he had seen before. The other trial takers on the other platforms also had stunned expressions on their faces. What rune is this? Why have I never seen it before? How do you draw a Fulu that you have never seen before? At this moment, Elder Su's voice was heard. Those who successfully draw this rune within 4 hours will pass the 3rd round and enter the final round of the trial. Countless talisman papers and cinnabar flew in from outside the platform. This time there were 100 talisman papers. The Talisman Tao trial this time seemed to be different from the previous ones. Li Mu looked up at the golden runes above and somewhat understood the Fulu School's purpose. The first 2 rounds tested the trial taker's basic skills. The 3rd round tested the trial taker's talent. Those common Fulu, even those without talent, could be drawn skillfully after thousands of practice over a long period of time. Passing the first 2 rounds only meant that they had a solid foundation in the exorcism talisman. It did not mean anything. But for a new Fulu the result was different. Those with outstanding talent in the talisman Dao might be able to grasp it in a few hours. Those with average talent would need a few days or even 10 days to half a month. This Fulu was not in the talisman books that Li Mu had seen before. It should be a new Fulu created by the Fulu school. He had never seen a Fulu before. He did not know the order of writing the runes or the strength of his dermic powers when writing the runes. He had to test them one by one. Li Mu picked up the brush and dipped it in cinnabar. He closed his eyes and pondered for a while before starting to write. He finished drawing the runes in one go, but his magic power was not sealed in the rune paper. This meant that he had failed. I can't inject my magic power. The order of the runes is wrong. Li Mu thought for a moment and picked up the brush again. He changed the order of writing the runes, but he still couldn't seal the magic power. Li Mu lowered his head and looked at the ruined talisman paper. He thought to himself, during the last 2 strokes the mana leaked out. It's because the mana input was too strong and exceeded the upper limit of this talisman. Again, on the square of the main peak, an elder who had been staring at Li Mu said, "He has already failed twice." Another elder Taoist priest said, "It's normal. A new Fulu, even if you and I have it in our hands, we can't succeed in one try. We have to try many times. However, this talisman is not complicated." Four hours later, the trial takers who had yet to fully comprehend the talisman on the trial platform had lost their chance to pass the 3rd stage. At this time there were less than 100 people at the foot of the mountain. The 3rd trial eliminated 90% of the trial takers. Out of the 6,000 people, only 3 trials left 2 digits. Among these people, there were dozens of people who would be eliminated in the 4th trial. They had already learned the rules of the 4th trial from the trial takers who had participated in the 4th trial. They estimated in their hearts which step they could reach. Occasionally they would look up at the figure at the front and secretly curse him as a monster. On the stone steps, Li Mu had already walked up the 43rd step. This meant that he had drawn 43 Fulu without missing a single detail. He stayed on this step for a full quarter of an hour and did not take another step forward. In the world of cultivation, the Fulu was divided into heaven, earth, Xian and Huang. Each stage was further divided into upper, middle and lower grades. There were a total of 4 stages and 12 grades. With Li Mu's current spiritual power, he could only draw a Xian upper grade Fulu. As for the earth lower grade Fulu, he would need to be at least at the 5th level of cultivation to draw one. The last Fulu he drew was a Xian upper grade. The next step would probably be an earth Fulu. With his current spiritual power, it was impossible to draw one. Li Mu looked back and realized that the people below had at most reached the 10th step. It was almost impossible for them to continue to reach the 30th step without making any mistakes. The current him had already won. However, Li Mu still wanted to try. At most he would fail and be sent down the mountain. But before that he needed to rest for a while to recover his spiritual power. After drawing more than 40 Fulu in a row, his spiritual power was about to be depleted. Even the donkey in the workshop would not dare to work so hard. If it was not for the fact that he was determined to get that talisman, he would have already given up on the 30th step. The higher the step, the more insurance. He sat cross-legged on the stone step and meditated to recover his spiritual power. After an unknown amount of time, Li Mu suddenly felt movement beside him. He opened his eyes and saw a young man walking to the 43rd step he was on. The young man glanced at him and said, "Hey, make way." Li Mu was shocked. This person was clearly also a cultivator participating in the trial. He actually also reached the 43rd step. Sure enough, he could not underestimate the heroes of the world. No one knew better than him how difficult it was to reach here from the first step. If not for the clear heart mantra, Li Mu would have stopped long ago. That person walked to the middle of the 43rd step and closed his eyes. The first and second trials tested the most basic exorcism talisman. The third trial tested the Fulu. Although it was a new Fulu that he had never seen before, the dermic powers required to write it did not exceed the exorcism talisman. In the fourth trial, Li Mu wrote the Fulu. When he reached the limit of his own dermic powers, the rules of the trial seemed to change. He had never drawn the purple heaven thunder talisman before and did not know the order of the talisman. He also did not have the dermic powers to write the talisman. But in this trial, the Fulu school had given him everything he needed. All he had to do was control his dermic powers and write the talisman step by step. It was probably the same for the cultivators behind him. The Tao of Fulu. Writing the talisman was not difficult, and controlling the dermic powers was not difficult. The difficult part was to smoothly write the talisman while ensuring that the dermic powers of each talisman were stable. The transition of dermic powers between different talismans was a problem of multitasking. The higher the level of the Fulu, the more complex the talisman was. The more dermic powers changed and the higher the probability of failure. At this time the use of talent was revealed. Li Mu did not have much talent, but he had a cheat. He held the talisman brush and did not immediately start writing the talisman. Instead, he practiced dozens of times in the void and memorized the talisman characters of the Purple Heaven Thunder talisman. Then, without using the talisman materials, he felt the process of the dermic powers changing as he wrote the talisman. He repeated this dozens of times before he looked at the talisman paper on the table. He lifted the brush and began to write slowly. At the main peak of Mount Baiyun in the Dao Palace, Jianghu closed his eyes. He also held a talisman brush in his hand. His wrist moved slowly in the void, but it did not seem to be of his own accord. In the art of dark light, Li Mu's body was still covered in a cloud of fog. But if one looked closely at the hand that extended out of the fog, one would realize that his hand and Hyun Jinko's hand moved in the same direction. After a while, Hyun Jinko opened his eyes and said, "The talisman is complete." The Fulu school recruited disciples not based on cultivation but on talent. In the fourth stage, when the Fulu that the trial taker wrote exceeded the limits of his dermic powers, the peak masters would lend their dermic powers and insights to them. This was also a fortune that the Fulu school gave to the trial takers. They had worked hard to reach the fourth stage. Even if they could not enter the Fulu school in the end, they would still have some insights into the Fulu Dao. Over the millennia, countless people were inspired by this and created new Fulu Dao. They established their own sects outside and became the external branches of the Fulu school. Just looking at the runes gave him a headache, not to mention writing runes. Li Mu wanted to give up at the first moment, but he forced himself to hold back. He could not give up. The person from before had stopped at this stage. If he gave up, he would only be able to fight to a draw with him. It was still unknown who would emerge victorious in the end. However, for Li Qing's sake, he had to get this talisman. Li Mu took a deep breath and endured the dizziness as he looked at the Fulu. On the main peak of Mount Baiyun. 3 days had passed. The crowd in the square gathered and dispersed, then gathered again. At this time, there were only a dozen people standing in the square, looking up at the image in the sky. He's been standing there for 3 days. When will it end? If you're not confident, just give up. There's no point in continuing like this. In the image, the figure standing on the stone steps, shrouded in clouds and mist, had been standing there for 3 whole days. This had never happened in the past trials. Everyone on Mount Baiyun was waiting for him alone. Below the stone steps, nearly 100 people sat cross-legged and meditated, occasionally looking up. 3 days was nothing to cultivators. Those who had not walked the stone steps personally did not know how difficult it was to climb each step. They only had respect for those who could reach the 50th step. The young man standing at the bottom of the stone steps had been looking at Li Mu for 3 whole days. There was no anxiety on his face as he looked calmly at Li Mu's back. There was a hint of suspicion in his eyes as he muttered, "It's been 3 days. What the hell is Xianjizi doing?" According to the rules of the Tao of Talismans trial, a cultivator could stay on every step for a maximum of 6 hours. If he hadn't started writing talismans after 6 hours had passed, then he would be directly teleported to the bottom and the trial would be terminated. However, the junior that he could not see through had been standing on the 56th step for 3 whole days. He could not figure it out. He acknowledged the junior's strength. There was no reason for him to be so careful with a mere heaven-grade golden armor divine army talisman. If he could not draw it, he could not draw it even if he stood there for 3 years, let alone 3 days. If he succeeded, he would have succeeded 3 days ago. If he failed, he would have failed 3 days ago. How could he drag it out until today? Dao Palace of the main peak. Several heads, including the Fulu School's headmaster, had not taken a single step out of the palace during these 3 days. In the scene shown by the profound light technique, Li Mu was holding a talisman brush and drawing a certain talisman in the air. He had already drawn it a few thousand times. His face was pale and his aura was weak. His eyes were bloodshot, but his gaze was increasingly confident. At a certain moment, Li Mu sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He threw a few pills into his mouth and began to quickly recover his spirit. After a quarter of an hour, he stood up again and walked to the table. There was a talisman paper on the table. This talisman paper was several times larger than an ordinary talisman paper. It was not yellow paper. The talisman paper itself emitted bursts of spiritual energy. It should be made from the wood pulp of some kind of precious tree. At the corner of the table, there was a jade bowl filled with golden talisman liquid. 4 fulu below the earth stage, one could use cinnabar to draw talismans. For those above the earth stage, one needed a special talisman liquid. This golden talisman liquid emitted a faint fragrance. Li Mu swallowed his saliva and recited the clear heart technique. Only then did he resist the urge to drink it in one gulp. The higher the level of the fulu, the stronger the spiritual energy contained in the spirit liquid. This bowl of spirit liquid was enough to make his body explode. After adjusting his state to its peak, Li Mu picked up the talisman brush and prepared to draw talismans. Because there was only one chance for the trial, he had already practiced the fulu's talisman thousands of times in the past 3 days. He had already memorized it by heart and would not make a mistake. As for spiritual energy, he did not know how this talisman brush worked. It could actually draw on the spiritual energy of the Fulu school's experts. Li Mu guessed that the one who provided him with the spiritual energy should be one of the heads. He had never controlled such powerful spiritual energy. It even gave him the illusion that he could fight with the Empress. He had not contacted the Empress for 3 days. In this flask space, the spiritual snail could not send messages. Moreover, there was a live broadcast of the trial using the dark light technique. Li Mu could not chat with the Empress. He cast these thoughts aside. After calming down, he began to focus on drawing talismans. He held the talisman brush, controlled the majestic spiritual energy and made the first stroke. In the Taoist palace, the heads of the peaks were also extremely focused. In the Tao of Fulu, one must acknowledge the existence of talent. Talent was more important than hard work. This was also the common understanding of everyone. Li Mu's talent in the Tao of talismans was rare in the world. However, what he was drawing now was a saint-level Fulu. There were originally 6 levels of Fulu. People only knew about the heaven, earth, black and yellow but not the divine. This was because the last 2 levels of Fulu were rarely seen. The Fulu school had saint-level Fulu, but that was left behind by the sect's seniors hundreds of years ago. In these hundreds of years, countless experts in the Fulu school had not been able to draw a single saint-level Fulu. Could this young man in the drawing possibly add a saint-level Fulu to the Fulu school? In the flask space, Li Mu was fully focused on drawing. Although this Fulu was complicated, after 3 days of practice he was already very familiar with it. He had even developed muscle memory. With his eyes closed and without thinking he could draw it out instinctively. Of course he was not so careless. There was only one chance. If he made a mistake he would have to fight an extra round with that unidentified young man. His opponent was most likely an old monster. This was Li Mu's only chance. Li Mu concentrated, seriously writing the runes and carefully controlling his spiritual energy. This was very taxing on his mind. Li Mu's face was pale and his clothes were soaked in sweat. However, he still gritted his teeth and persevered. When he reached the last stroke of the last rune, Li Mu held his breath and focused, gently placing the brush down. The talisman paper was unharmed, the brush was unharmed, and his spiritual energy did not leak out. It was all sealed in the Fulu. Puff! Li Mu spat out a mouthful of blood and collapsed to the ground. This was caused by overdrawing his mind for a long time. The exhaustion of this Fulu on his mind was far beyond his imagination. His figure flashed and he fell on the stone steps. He's out. He's finally out. He wasn't teleported, he succeeded. 3 days, 3 whole days? What kind of Fulu did he draw? On the main peak square below the stone steps, countless people exclaimed. The 3 days of waiting had finally come to an end. However, before they could say anything they seemed to sense something and looked up at the sky. The White Cloud Mountain was the ancestral court of the Talisman sect. The weather was as clear as day for hundreds of years, and every day was a beautiful day. However, today thick dark clouds suddenly gathered in the sky. The dark clouds gathered at an extremely fast speed. In a few breaths they occupied the entire sky above everyone's heads. In the dark clouds, lightning snakes danced wildly like giant dragons. Under the dark clouds, whether it was the disciples of White Cloud Mountain or the trial takers, they all felt as if a huge rock was pressing down on their hearts, making it difficult for them to breathe. Everyone's faces were filled with horror. This was a scene they had never seen before in their lives. Below the stone steps, the young man's expression changed greatly after a short moment of shock. He said in shock, "Heavenly tribulation, this is the heavenly tribulation of a saint-level Fulu. A saint-level Fulu has descended." As if realizing something, he suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Mu, who was above the stone steps. Could it be that he had been drawing a saint-level Fulu for the past 3 days? What about becoming a core disciple first, then an elder, then a head teacher, and finally the head teacher? Elder Su used to think that what he said was a joke. But now he had successfully taken the first step. If he obtained first place in the trial, he would become a core disciple of the Fulu school. And the commotion above his head just now was most likely caused by him. Things seemed to be getting a little serious. He thought for a long time before raising his head to look at the Fulu school's head teacher. He said, "Head teacher, this disciple has an important matter to report." The Fulu school's head teacher listened to him and only smiled. He said, "I understand." Elder Su was somewhat stunned. He could not understand the head teacher's reaction. Ever since the establishment of the Fulu school, it had not participated in the worldly affairs of the imperial court. Although it cooperated with the imperial court, it also kept its distance. The imperial court coveted the Fulu school. This matter was not a small matter for the Fulu school. However, since the head teacher did not say anything, he could not say more. At this moment, the Fulu school's head teacher spoke again. "Send the second place of this trial here." This trial of talismans was the strangest one that Elder Su had ever seen in his life. Not to mention that rare phenomenon, no one had ever reached the 50th step in the past trials. This time 2 people had appeared. Could it be that the heavens were foretelling that the Fulu school was about to prosper? Elder Su quickly sent the person to the Taoist palace on the main peak. The Fulu school's head teacher said, "Elder Su, you may leave." Elder Su looked at the young man with a puzzled expression, but he still left without a word. The young man stood in the Taoist palace and looked straight at the Fulu school's head teacher. The Fulu school's head teacher cupped his hands and said, "It's been 20 years since we last met, Uncle Master Fu Daozi. How have you been?" The young man's figure changed and he turned from a young man in his 20s to an old man. The old man's hair and beard were all white, and his face was full of wrinkles. His body exuded a strong aura of lethargy. He looked at the Fulu school's head teacher and said indifferently, "Xian Jizi, you haven't improved in 20 years, White Cloud Peak." Li Mu woke up in bed and saw Xiao Bai and Wan Wan sitting on his left and right side of the bed, worried. "Young master. Benefactor is awake." Seeing that Li Mu had woken up, smiles immediately appeared on their faces. Before Li Mu could say anything to them, he felt the spirit snail vibrate. The Empress was contacting him. Li Mu said to the 2 girls, "I'm a little hungry. Is there anything to eat at home?" Xiao Bai immediately said, "Benefactor, what do you want to eat?" "I'll make it for you," Li Mu said, "just make some porridge." Xiao Bai and Wan Wan ran out to cook. Chapter 335. If he disappeared for 3 days for no reason and missed more than 100 calls from his boss, the consequences would be very serious. Unless he was not doing it for personal reasons but to get investments for his company. If he could tie Flu School to his and the Empress's war chariot, then even if the old and new parties joined forces, they could only be evenly matched with her. After chatting with the Empress for a while and coaxing her, Li Mu put away the conch. His body was still a little weak, and he did not know how long it would take for him to fully recover. Sitting on the bed, the more he thought about it, the more he felt that Flu School was inhumane. The saint-level Fulu consumed a lot of mental energy. Even the Flu School's headmaster would not be able to draw it. A few 6th and 7th realms actually tricked a 4th realm rookie like him into wasting his mental energy to work for them. Was this something a human would do? Li Mu could not take this lying down no matter what. Soon, Xiao Bai finished cooking the porridge and made a few side dishes with Wan Wan. She brought them to the bedside and fed Li Mu spoonful by spoonful. At the same time, in the Taoist palace on the main peak, the Lu school's headmaster and several heads of the sect stared unblinkingly at a Fulu floating in the air. Spiritual power flowed in this Fulu, and it seemed to have a strange power. Even the surrounding heaven and earth became illusory. This aura, it really is saint level? How many years has it been since a saint level Fulu appeared in the ancestral court? Unbelievable, this is unbelievable. He's only at the 4th realm. If he's already like this at the 4th realm, when he grows up in the future, as long as he has enough materials, won't he be able to mass-produce saint-level or even god-level cultivators? We must keep him in Lu school. He is the hope of our sect's prosperity. The few of them looked at the saint-rank talisman amulet with burning gazes. The significance of a saint-rank talisman amulet to the talisman amulet sect was too great. If the saint-level Fulu could be mass-produced, the structure of the 6 Taoist sects might be completely changed. Master Ashen Pine revealed a pondering expression and said, I still can't figure out how he could draw a Fulu. Could it be that he was once a powerhouse in the upper realm and his current body was just a body he possessed? Hyun Jinko shook his head and said, if it was a body possession, how could it hide from the Supreme Leader and the Empress of the Great Zhou? Master Ashen Pine said, but this matter is too inconceivable. It's even inexplicable. Hyun Jinko looked at him and asked, Junior brother, do you remember that there is a special constitution in this world? Master Ashen Pine thought for a moment and said in surprise, Senior brother, you mean that he possesses the rare heart of 7 orifices? Chapter 336. Participating in the Talisman Dao trial was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. They could get the talisman and give Li Qing a chance to return to the Fulu school in the future. They could also become fellow disciples with Lu Hanyin and have a closer relationship. They could also take the opportunity to infiltrate the Fulu school and become the Empress's spy in the Fulu school. The 3 of them could answer to anyone. It was the best of 3, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Lu Hanyin was touched and snuggled in Li Mu's arms. The 2 of them were affectionate for a while. While Lu Hanyin was bathing, Li Mu went to the main peak of Baiyin Mountain. He still had not settled the score with the Fulu school's head teacher. He had no choice but to join the Fulu school. Otherwise he would be exposed in front of the Empress and Lu Hanyin. Of these 2 women, one could make him unable to attend court, and the other could make him unable to sleep. He could not afford to offend either of them. However, he still had great use for the talisman in the future, so he could not use it on himself. Fortunately, the Fulu school's head teacher said that he could join the sect without the talisman. It should not be a polite remark. However, before joining the sect, Li Mu had to settle the score first. When he became a disciple of the Fulu school, he would be family with them. This score was not easy to settle. Baiyin Mountain, Taoist Palace on the main peak. The Fulu school's head teacher, Xianjizi, looked at Li Mu and asked, Young friend, your mind is injured. Why don't you recuperate on Baiyin Mountain? Li Mu cursed in his heart. How shameless. How could they not know why his mind was injured? If they did not use him, how could his mind be injured? Li Mu looked at him and said calmly, I'm here to get my 5 heaven-grade Fulu. Xianjizi said, there are only a few heaven-grade Fulu in the ancestral court every year, and they are all given to core disciples. I don't have any now. Li Mu's face darkened as he asked, you lied to me? Xianjizi smiled and said, when your mind recovers, I can ask the peak masters to help you draw 5 of them. The materials used for the talismans will be provided by the ancestral court. Li Mu looked at Xianjizi in a daze. He couldn't imagine that someone like him who looked like an immortal could actually smile and say such shameless words. It was one thing to use him, but to compensate him for his Fulu, he had to draw it himself. Was this something a sect leader would do? Li Mu took a deep breath and swallowed his anger. After all, his wife was still in Fulu school and he would need their help in the future. As long as he had the materials, it was fine for him to draw it himself. Sooner or later he would get his revenge somewhere else. Today he blackmailed him for 5 Fulu, and tomorrow, Li Mu would kidnap his family's Zhong. Otherwise, I can see with my own eyes that you become the sect master of Fu Lu school. Li Mu was stunned for a moment and said uncertainly, Sect? Sect master? Fu Daozi sneered and said, when you break through to the transcendence realm, as long as you have the materials, you can have as many saint-level Fu Lu as you want. At that time, Fu Lu school will rely on you to develop. Xian Jizi won't have the face to hold on to the position of sect master. He stole my position, so I will let my disciple steal his position. After Li Mu came back to his senses, he looked at Fu Daozi and said firmly, don't worry, master. I will work hard to improve my cultivation and avenge you. Good disciple. Fu Daozi laughed and said, let's go. Let's get to know your senior brothers and sisters again. It's a pity that those two old guys are not here. They have more good things. Li Mu soon understood what get to know them again meant. He touched the flask heaven ring on his finger and thought, sooner or later I will have to change to a bigger space ring. On Jade Emperor Peak, Master Xingyang took out a Fu Lu with extreme heartache and passed it to Li Mu. He said, this is senior brother's gift for our first meeting. Junior brother, you must accept it. On Azure Profound Peak, Hyun Jinko had an embarrassed expression as he looked at Fu Daozi and said, Martial uncle, I don't have anything good in my possession right now. Can I? Fu Daozi frowned and said, where's your Azure Profound sword? Hyun Jinko sighed and said, I gave it to junior brother Li's Dao companion last time. On Songling Peak, Master Ashen Pine passed a stack of Fu Lu to Li Mu and said, senior brother doesn't have any heaven rank Fu Lu, but these are high-grade earth rank Fu Lu. Junior brother, please accept them. On White Cloud Peak. Fu Daozi listened to the report of an elder and said, what? Yujin is in closed-door cultivation? Where is she? I'll go wake her up. Li Mu hurriedly stopped him. Master, forget it, forget it. It's not too late to wait for her to come out. 2 hours later, Li Mu landed on White Cloud Peak again. He touched the ring on his hand once again. Other than Yujin, who had yet to come out of closed-door cultivation, all the first seats, including the sect master, had been severely blackmailed. If it wasn't for Li Mu stopping him, Fu Daozi might have forcefully called Yujin out of closed-door cultivation. Lu Hanyin had already finished bathing. She walked to Li Mu's side and asked, have you joined a sect? Li Mu nodded. Lu Hanyin looked up at him and asked rather proudly, then are you going to call me martial uncle in the future? Li Mu shook his head. He was now a second-generation disciple of the Fu Lu school and was of the same generation as the Fu Lu school sect master, her master Yujin, and the first seats of the peak. Lu Hanyin was slightly stunned and then said, could it be that you've also become the disciple of a first seat of a peak? And who were those people behind him wearing strange clothes? Their fighting style was so strange that they could actually draw talismans out of thin air without using talisman materials. Although today's transcendent experts could also draw talismans out of thin air, the power of the talisman was far from being comparable to the ones in this scene. Li Mu had many mysteries in his heart that had not been solved. Just as he was about to look for a while, the previous scene suddenly changed. He returned to the Dao Palace on the main peak again. In front of him were Xian Jizi and Fu Daozi. Fu Daozi looked at Li Mu and asked expectantly, how many talisman did you see? How many? Li Mu recalled for a moment and recalled the talismans that filled the sky and densely covered the entire sky. He said, there should be around 1,000. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.